by mail to the Ridgewood News, the record, and by submission to all persons entitled to same is provided by law of this schedule, including the date and time of this meeting. Roll call.
Councilman Hache?
Here.
Councilman Voigt?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Seaton?
Here.
Councilwoman Walsh?
Here.
Mayor Knudsen?
Here. Please rise for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join us in a moment of silence for our men and women serving our nation and our first responders. Thank you. I just want to give the date. Today is October 25th, 2017, and we will go to public comments not to exceed 3 minutes per person for a total of 40 minutes. You can come to the microphone and state your name and address. And just pull that microphone right down. Okay, perfect.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is George Stafford. I live at 16 Kitchell Avenue in Wharton, New Jersey. I'm here representing the New Jersey Highlands Coalition and Keep It Green, which is a statewide advocacy group for open space. And it's open space that I would like to mention to you at this point. We have a resolution that we would ask you to consider at a future meeting, of course, calling on the legislature, the new legislature, to establish a firmly funded and continual open space program. As you know, we used to do it with bond issues, and then recently, in the last few years, we had a deal where we took some money from someplace else, and we put that together. The new legislature will have to reaffirm that, and what we'd like them to do at that point is to fully fund open space and to make the program continual. It's a very short resolution, not too many whereases. I'm an old town councilman, and I know that if you open up one of these pages and you've got 55 whereases, it kind of goes at the bottom of the pile. So, and basically it just asks that we do that. And the reason we're doing this is because last year at the end of our brief but very severe drought, it came to our attention that the groundwater and small stream water supplies were the last thing that recovered, which means that we were deeply into them during the drought. That very much concerns us because open space is where you get groundwater recharge, particularly agriculture and forested open space. And we need to hold on to it as much as we can. Since 1996, we've lost 250,000 acres of open space in the state of New Jersey, and we've added 1 million people. So you can see that we're kind of burning the candle at both ends. So we would like that program so that we can save the green infrastructure that we have. Our regular, normal infrastructure is in trouble enough. We lose about 25% of the treated water that we have in our distribution systems. And we don't have to maintain the green infrastructure. We don't have to take care of it. Worry about it's there, and it feeds the streams, and it feeds the groundwater, and that's what fills our reservoirs. And the more that gets paved over, not only did the less groundwater recharge we have, but the more runoff we have, and we all know we have problems with runoff. There is one more thing in the resolution. It calls for a pilot program that is a payment in lieu of taxation for communities. If you're one of these big townships out in West Jersey, and suddenly we take 300 or 400 acres of farmland off your tax rolls, now you got a hole in the budget. So there would be payments, and it's farmland assessment, so it's not that big of a deal, but it would cut down also on the opposition to that. One more thing, and I realize that buzzer says I'm over. Ballot question number 2. I have some flyers here. For legal reasons, I'm not supposed to tell you which way to vote on this, but it would dedicate funds that the state gets for natural resource damage to clean up natural resource damage. We're not doing that now. It can be switched. So I'll leave this with you unless you have questions.
You can bring those right up, and then if you have a copy of the resolution, do you have a copy with you? Okay, great.
email the copy to the clerk.
Okay, very good.
The clerks don't like to retype these things, they like to just kind of paste as it were, so.
Okay, thank you very much.
I appreciate your time. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening, Ann Loving, 342 South Irving Street. I was not able to attend the Community Relations Advisory Board meeting last Wednesday night, but I did get notes about the meeting from the Observer Corps. And this is the second time I've mentioned this. It seems to me that the CRAB is really inserting itself into the curriculum of the schools, talking about what museums they must or must not visit on field trips and whatnot. I did not know that an advisory board of the village council would be spending as much as an hour and a half of their time discussing where students are supposed to go on field trips and what museums. Should they go to the Holocaust Museum in Washington? Should they go to the Black History Museum? I just wanted to mention that I don't agree with that. I don't think that's the way it should be. And I did speak to one member of the Board of Ed today who staunchly agrees that they should not, the CRAB should not be inserting itself into that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Rurik Halaby, 374 Evergreen. Just wanted to mention that I did write to the state senator and the two assemblymen suggesting that they do what they can to help Senator Weinberg pass the two bills that she's introduced. We need more openness, not less openness in government. And in all candor, I find the Oprah procedure in the village to be a bit of a joke. I have nothing but the highest regard for Donna and for Heather. You've seen, but somehow trying to get anything done under Oprah is challenging. I remember I once asked for any emails that has my name on it going between Michael Seed and Susan Knudsen. It was going to cost me $1,200. I've never heard anything like that. So anytime I apply for something, there's always some reason why it's difficult to get, or it's going to take a month or two, or what have you. Now, I think anything you do should be open with exceptions. Now we're attending more and more in the village for things are hidden unless you decide to disclose them. It should be the other way around. The mark of a democracy is openness. The mark of an authoritative government is controlling the flow of information to the public. So I urge you to reverse your vote where you voted against these bills, because we need more openness and less things that are controlled by the village. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. No one else will close public comments, and we'll move on to a presentation regarding affordable housing, presentation by Beth McManus, who is our special conflict planner. And so we're really excited to have Beth here. She's highly qualified, and she helps us with our applications before the planning board pertaining to the housing development applications downtown. And she's been our kind of you can come on up, Beth.
Yeah, I just want to say a little bit about this. As everybody knows, we thought it would be a great idea to be able to, and the council would be able to make a presentation as to the status of affordable housing and where we are in regard to the declaratory judgment process in the courts. As most of you may know, Beth McManus, who's a planner with Clark, Caton, and Hintz out of Trenton, has been our affordable housing professional planner for a little over a year at this point. And she was brought in to help us go through the process, and with that, we knew at the time that Beth had a tremendous amount of experience. Not only is she a planner for a number of municipalities, but is also one of the planners that different courts have relied on and appointed as a master to oversee many towns' affordable housing responsibilities and mandate. So we thought with her experience, her expertise, that it would serve the village very well. We are now at a present stage in the litigation where we are having discussions with Fair Share Housing Center with regard to what we've done so far in our affordable housing mandate and where we're going to be looking for over the course of the next couple of months to try and determine what our allocation is going to be in the future. So we thought it was a good time to come in, talk about the process, talk about, a little bit about the history of it all. And Beth was willing to do that, so she came all the way up from South Jersey tonight just to make this presentation, and I think she's ready to roll with it, so.
Thank you very much. Okay, so first, it's nice to see everybody again. I don't make very many appearances before the Village Council. I think this is actually my first, so it's nice to start this process before all of you in a public way. So, as Matt said, I'm here to do a couple things. I wanted to bring everybody up to speed on the litigation, but also I thought this was a good opportunity to make sure that all of you, and to the extent that your public is here, understands the process that we're in terms of why it is New Jersey municipalities have to go through this process, what Ridgewood has done in the past to get you where you are today, and then also what is affordable housing, because I think that's something that not a lot of folks understand, and then we'll follow up with what I think may happen in the future, but a lot of that is going to be subject to ongoing discussions with the court. So with that, let me get going. Okay, so first and foremost, even though municipalities feel pressure to engage in this process, it's actually a voluntary process for towns. It may not feel like it, but quite literally, towns have an option to participate in the affordable housing process, although it's heavily incentivized. So for those towns that choose to participate, like I said, it's incentivized, and it's done so through the incentive is that a municipality is immune from something that's called a builder's remedy lawsuit or an exclusionary zoning lawsuit. And that is litigation that is often, but not always, brought to a municipality that is not complying with its affordable housing regulations. And that lawsuit typically claims from the developer that that developer finds that the municipality is not providing its obligation to do affordable housing and that they are more than willing to do it for the town. When they make that offer, it is typically in an inclusionary project, which means it's a mix of market rate and affordable units. And while those projects differ throughout all of the communities, I would say the one thing that binds them all together is that those projects are typically too big for the towns. The density is simply too great, too many units, perhaps too high. Now, what is too great varies varies significantly throughout the state. What might be too much for towns in Hudson County is just simply unfathomable for towns in South Jersey. So it varies, but at the end of the day, it's always just too much. And in order for towns to protect themselves from that builder's remedy lawsuit, they would participate in this process. And what that means is adoption of a housing plan and seeking approval of it from, before it was the Council on Affordable Housing, that state agency that handled affordable housing in New Jersey, but now, of course, it's from the courts. And in COA, in the past, Ridgewood actually did that. You got substantive certification, and now, of course, we're in the court process because COA is non-functioning, as I'll talk about in a minute. And so the incentive would be, the process would be to receive a judgment of repose, which is essentially the court stamp of approval instead of COA stamp of approval, in exchange for that immunity from builder's remedy lawsuits. And so, thus far, Ridgewood has decided to participate, and through this court process that I'm going to walk everybody through today, we're continuing to participate, and today you remain immune or protected from these builder's remedy lawsuits until this process ends, or until you go through and receive a judgment of repose for the specified period of time. So very quickly, I want to make sure everybody understands what affordable housing is, because there are a lot of rumors around the state as to what that includes. A lot of folks think that affordable housing units are for households that don't work, and it's really no-income housing, but that's really not the case. And so here are some income figures that are used to help determine who it is qualifies. So on that top line, the median income, that's simply there for reference. That's the median of the 4-county region that your incomes are based upon: Bergen, Hudson, Passaic, and Sussex County. But as you can see in the table, the moderate income ranges generally, it's based on household size, between $48,000 a year and about $69,000 a year. And it goes down to low income from $18,000 to about $26,000 a year. And so those are 3 different income levels that need to be addressed as part of affordable housing: the very low, the low, and the median income. Each of them have their own specific requirements that I can go into, but I think what's really important here is to understand that when we talk about affordable housing, we're not simply talking about very low income housing. We're talking about households that make as much as $86,000 a year, and so that might be 2 parents and 2 kids, or it could be a single person with 3 children. It depends on the household configuration.
Did you mean moderate low and very? Excuse me, Pam, we can't just call out like that.
There'll be a period for
Yeah.
questions at the end. Okay, so save it.
So as an example of what these income limits mean, the income limits actually dictate the rents of rental units and the sale prices of for sale units. So just as some illustrative figures, you can get a sense that low income, between very low and moderate income homes will sell generally between $40,000 and $165,000 a year. So as an example, the $165,000 a year home is a moderate income 3-bedroom home. The $40,000 home is a very low income 1-bedroom unit. So it varies significantly. And then similarly for the rents, those vary between about $350 a month all the way up to $1,100 a month. But again, the $350 is for a 1-bedroom, very low income unit, and the $1,100 is for a 3-bedroom, moderate income unit. Okay, so now that we have a general sense about what affordable housing is, who might live there, what incomes would apply, I wanted to give everybody an understanding, or maybe a refresher for those that have already dealt with this and thought about it, as to why it is that we're here. New Jersey is in a really unique circumstance. This is the only state in the nation that has this type of an affordable housing legal situation, in that this stems back from a 1975 New Jersey Supreme Court decision known as the Mount Laurel decision, and very quickly that decision basically determined that municipalities have a constitutional obligation to provide for households of all incomes in their community. It was sort of a general decision, but it made that very strong and significant determination that towns have a constitutional obligation. This is not simply a legislative requirement that can simply be amended in an act. These are not simply state agency rules. This is something that stems to the New Jersey Constitution. That was followed up several years later with the Mount Laurel II decision, which got a little bit more detailed. It ultimately took things a step farther. Instead of just saying towns generally have an obligation, but instead towns have a specific obligation that must be met. And that was generally as a result of a lot of chaos in the courts as towns tried to figure out what it is their obligation was. And during that time, as a result of the decision, that's when the court stepped in and not only stated towns have an obligation, but that they need to have their plans approved, and the court started doing so. That was quickly followed up by the 1985 Fair Housing Act, and that was important because it gave some order to the chaos that was going on in the state. It put together a general methodology for how obligations should be determined and some administrative rules for how towns would work through the process to see their plans approved. COA, as part of the Fair Housing Act, they set up COA, the Council on Affordable Housing. COA generally functioned between 1986 and 2014. There's some debate as to whether or not their rules were as good as they should have been, but at the end of the day, we actually had a state agency that promulgated rules and then implemented them, and did that multiple times. Things started to break down as part of the third round, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail in just a moment. But as part of the Fair Housing Act and as part of COA's work, it set forth a structure for towns to have an obligation assigned to them and for them to satisfy the obligation. And they did so using the term rounds. So the first round is 1987 through 1993 time period, and that round represents a time period for which COA calculated each municipality's obligation and set forth the time for the town to adopt the housing element and seek their plan approval. They did that again with a new set of regulations for the second round between 1993 and 1999. And then in the third round, they started, there were a lot of starts and stops. We'll go through that in a minute, but at the end of the day, the current third round, because of COA's starts and stops, is no longer a 6-year time period. It's from 1999 through 2025. So it's really a 26-year time period, and that's going to become very important in another slide in just a moment. So during that 1999 through today time period, there's been a lot of activity at COA as well as in the courts. Like I said, COA had a number of starts and stops. Their first, technically their first effort was even before this slide, back in the earlier rules, or earlier of 2000s. COA should have issued rules in 1999. They failed to do so. There was some litigation. Ultimately, 5 years later, in 2004, we had our first set of rules. Those were termed the gross share rules. Those rules were subsequently overturned by the courts for reasons I can get into, but I won't bore you with it unless you'd like me to later. They did so again in 2008. Again, those rules were overturned by the courts. That resulted in a variety of court cases. Ultimately, in 2013, as a result of various challenges to to the court's decision to overturn those rules, we finally had in 2013 a Supreme Court decision that once and for all said no to COA. They are not able to rely upon their gross share methodology. COA understood that decision. In 2014, they attempted to adopt new rules, but failed. Literally, they had a 3-3 tie at the COA board meeting, and unfortunately, that resulted in a motion from Fair Share Housing Center to require the state agency to take the action it's legally required to do so. That resulted in the 2015 Supreme Court decision, which is really the reason why we're here today. That 2015 decision took into consideration all of the history of COA from the last 15 or so years and essentially found that COA is no longer a functioning state agency and that towns can't wait for COA to determine the obligation and then to review and approve housing elements. And they essentially told the towns, go work with the courts. We have a process from basically the pre-1985 Fair Housing Act that we can reinvigorate at a statewide level, generally speaking. And so municipalities should work with the courts to determine their obligation, have the judges in the courts determine the obligation, then work with the courts to have their housing plans reviewed and approved. Be that as it may, that's a situation we are in today. And what it's resulted in is, quite frankly, a very long time period. The court actually anticipated that this whole thing would take 5 months, if you can believe it. It's been more than 2 years at this point, and not even half the towns are completed with the process. Throughout all of this, beginning back in the first round, Ridgewood has actually been working very hard to comply with its constitutional obligation. And quite frankly, you've done quite a lot of good in getting you to a much better position today than a lot of other communities are in. So, and that started in 1990 when the town, subsequent to an adoption of a housing plan, you submitted it to COA and you got certification from COA. That was your first stamp of approval. You did so again in 2004, and again you got that stamp of approval from COA. So that has been very beneficial to you because that means we have existing affordable housing credits that have already been reviewed and approved by the state agency, and that's going to help us as we move forward in this process. In 2008, you guys again attempted to do what was asked of you in that you adopted a housing plan element and fair share plan. You submitted it to COA. Unfortunately, if you remember from my slide about the third round, COA's rules were overturned and they were barred from taking action on your housing plan. And so Ridgewood is actually, at that time, you were in the same position as many other communities. A lot of towns spent significant time and resources to put together those plans, only to have the state agency let them sit on a shelf even today. Beyond their 2008 housing plan that was adopted, the village then went ahead and adopted some inclusionary zoning in 2015, and that's actually being realized today through a series of approvals that I'm going to review in a minute for mixed use and inclusionary projects. In 2015, your village councilor filed a declaratory judgment, which started the process that we're in. So that declaratory judgment is, the declaratory action requires that, ask that municipalities submit to the court and essentially raise their hand to the judge and say, Judge, we understand there's a constitutional obligation. We understand that we can't apply to COA anymore for review and approval. Instead, we are here. Please help us comply with our obligation and review and approve our housing plan elements. And in doing so, perhaps most importantly, that continued your protection for builder's remedy lawsuits. As a result of entering into that court process, municipalities, every single town, are required, I don't think that's too strong of a word, required to essentially sit down with Fair Share Housing Center to discuss your plan and to discuss your obligation. Fair Share Housing Center, or FSHC as you'll see abbreviated in this presentation, is an interested party in every single declaratory judgment action. They were a party to the Supreme Court decision, and as a result, the courts have identified them as a party that should be involved in municipalities, provided they're interested in doing so. And let me tell you, they're interested in just about every town in New Jersey. And so what this process looks like is Fair Share putting together its numbers, its obligations for communities across the state, and seeking to determine whether or not a municipality can settle with them, settling in terms of executing a settlement agreement that identifies the municipality's obligation, as well as how it will be satisfied, and a number of other items that I'll go through in a minute. But what's important here is Fair Share Housing Center is a party in every single case in the state, including Ridgewood. So I don't want you folks to feel like you're getting picked on by them. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the obligation. There are three components of every single town's affordable housing obligation. The first one is a rehabilitation obligation. It's also referred to as the present need. Essentially, that is the number of housing units located within Ridgewood that are A, occupied by low and moderate income households, and B, in substandard condition. Now, this is a number that's generated based on census data in the American Community Survey, so it's not represented, it's not a number that was calculated by Fair Share Housing Center or from some state agency or other organization driving through Ridgewood and picking out each unit. It's simply an academic exercise based on the data sources. The second obligation is your prior round obligation, and that is the cumulative number between the first and the second round. And then third round obligation is, of course, the obligation from 1999 through 2025. But we're not done. In addition to those three components, your new construction obligation, which is your prior round, and your third round obligation is then split in a variety of subcomponents. So there's a 25% rental obligation. There's a maximum of 25% senior units that can be used to satisfy the obligation. There's a 50% low-income obligation, so if you've got 100 units, 50 of them need to be available to low-income households. And then lastly, there's a 13% very low-income obligation. But I do want to say that that 13% is included within the 50%. So 50% low, of which 13% must be very low, and then the remaining 50% is moderate income. Now, remember how I said Fair Share has intervened in every case? They're an interested party. Well, municipalities are also working with their own expert, and that expert is eConsult Solutions. They've actually put together a competing report with Fair Share Housing Center. They see the world a bit differently as to how that third round obligation should be calculated, and also how the rehabilitation obligation should be calculated. And so we have two reports that we're looking at to try to get guidance as to what municipalities' obligation is and what judges are looking at to determine what the municipality's obligation is. However, because judges are not experts in real estate and demographics and even planning, what they've done for those judges that have embarked in actually doing a trial, they've hired their own master. And that master is named Richard Redding, and he is an expert in all of these topics, and he is essentially working with the judge. He's reading the fair share report, he's reading the e-consult report, and he's coming up with his recommendation to the judge. He started to do so in some of the counties that the judges have engaged him in. Morris County is not one of them yet, but it's my understanding that your judge is going to bring him in if and when the time is appropriate. If essentially she needs to hear a trial about the number, if she doesn't have all towns that settle, she'll have to do that trial. And so we're looking at what Richard Redding has produced in other counties to try to get a sense of what he might say in Morris County. So as you see on this slide, there are three competing calculations and obligations for each component of a municipal affordable housing obligation. Your rehabilitation obligation, Fair Share Housing Center has calculated that at 53 units. However, e-consult and Richard Redding agree that it's 6 units for the village. The prior round obligation, if you look up in the slides, it's all the same number, 229 units, and that is because COA previously calculated that as part of the first and second rounds. It is unchallenged, and quite frankly, it is not up for discussion as part of this process. Your third round obligation, however, that varies. So Fair Share Housing Center has calculated it at 701 units. E-consult has calculated at 540 units. Richard Redding has come in at 418 units plus. And that plus is really important because his 418 units is only for the 2015 through 2025 period. So we know that 418 units is going to go up significantly to account for the first 15 years of the time period. So at the end of the day, the most important number on this screen is the third round number between 540 and 701. And if the municipality chooses to settle with Fair Share Housing Center, the 701 unit is the number you should be focusing on. If you go to trial, presumably you'll argue in favor of the e-consult Solutions would argue on your behalf in favor of the 540 unit obligation. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what the town might do to satisfy the obligation. For the rehab, it's at 53 units, I'd recommend that the town go through a structural condition survey. That's basically a windshield survey. You'd send your construction official out, and he would identify those units that are eligible for rehabilitation, and that number would come down. And that's something that you actually did in the previous rounds, and it's an exercise a lot of towns do if they feel like their rehabilitation obligation is too high. If you choose not to do that survey, or if you are able to utilize the 6 units calculated by other experts, you would simply participate in the Morris County Housing Rehabilitation Program and operate a municipal rehabilitation program. Those two components, the county program and a municipal program, would be required even if you do a structural condition survey to reduce that obligation, provided you have an obligation that's period. If it was adjusted down to 0, obviously you have no need to take action, but if it's anything other than 0, you'll have to run a rehabilitation program and participate in the county. Now, we talked about those very large numbers, the 229 for the prior round and all the way up to 701 for the third round. So that's the bad news. The good news is that COA's rules, the ones that we can still rely upon, actually anticipate that this happens to municipalities. It's well known that towns have obligations that go above and beyond that which they could ever support because of, most of the time, lack of vacant and developable land. Ridgewood is one of those, and you've actually been through a vacant land adjustment process. This was done back in 2004. And what this does, as I said, it's a recognition that the town doesn't have vacant and developable land, but it's an exercise, it's a theoretical exercise where the town looks at all of the vacant properties, all of the municipally owned properties, and determines through a very specified exercise in COA's rules what the capacity is for the town to construct affordable housing through inclusionary zoning. Your 2004 vacant land analysis actually determined that the obligation should be reduced down to a 0-unit RDP. That RDP stands for realistic development potential. So at that time, what COA found is that the town didn't have any vacant and developable land that could contribute towards generating affordable housing. So for vacant land towns, you have your obligation is split in two. The first one is your RDP. So COA has already determined that is 0. And then the remaining obligation, so in this case for the prior round, it's all of the 229 plus all of your third round obligation. All of that goes into what's called the unmet need. And so that's literally the mathematical difference between your RDP and your total new construction obligation. What's important about these two different components is that they both have necessary actions associated with them. So for towns that have an RDP, you must create affordable housing, you must create a realistic opportunity for the construction of housing to satisfy that RDP. The unmet need is a little bit different. It's a softer obligation. It's not a type of obligation that requires that the municipality create an affordable housing unit for every single unit included in that obligation. So for 229, you're not required to create opportunities for 229 units. You simply need to make an adequate contribution. And yes, that is exactly as subjective as it sounds, quite frankly. So typically, towns are required to do overlay zoning and things like that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I think what's important is for vacant land towns, there is no expectation that municipalities would fulfill the unmet need. It's just inherent in the process that if you get a vacant land adjustment, you do not have the land and the capacity to fulfill that entire obligation. So as I skipped ahead a little bit, but as I said, a 0-unit RDP was granted by COA. However, towns that get a vacant land adjustment are subject to having that RDP adjusted upward if there's a change in circumstances. So a change in circumstance usually means that a vacant property becomes available. Perhaps that's because a building has been demolished. Perhaps it's because common examples are if a golf course gets turned into housing. That's an example of where the RDP would have to increase, because simply just because the town had no capacity at that moment in time, so in your case in 2004, there's a recognition in COA's rules that that may not always be the case. And as opportunities arise, you're obligated to try to capture affordable housing in them. So in Ridgewood's case, we know that you've had a series of multifamily developments that include affordable housing approved over the last year or so. Those fit the definition of a changed circumstance, and so there is going to be an RDP assigned to each one of those sites. And so from those sites, we know that the RDP is likely to be about 48 units from those sites. So I know that sounds unfortunate, but I will say that you guys have generated affordable housing in every one of those properties, so you're not currently at a deficit from those sites. So I don't want folks to feel like now you have 48 new affordable housing units that you need to create above and beyond what's already been planned. That's not the case. For your unmet need, as I said, it's the mathematical difference between the total obligation and your RDP. So it looks like, depending on where those numbers end up, somewhere between 492 and 653 units. But that's going to be subject to the ongoing litigation. However, as part of your 2004 subcert with substantive certification with COA, you actually had a number of unmet need mechanisms recognized in there. And so not only do you have several steps towards satisfying the RDP, but you also have several steps towards meeting the unmet need. And I'll go through those in just a moment. Right now, actually. So you guys have 147 existing affordable housing units in the town, and that's predominantly from the Ridgecrest Apartments with 129 senior units. That's a 100% affordable housing project. You also have 4 units at the Woodside Gardens, another 4 units at the Broadway condominiums, and then 10 bedrooms in various group homes throughout the community. In addition, you've got 36 plus approved and planned units. So those 36 units are from those 4 multifamily projects that I referenced earlier, the KS Broad, the 257 Ridgewood or Enclave project, the Ridgewood Dayton project, and then the 240 or Chestnut Village project. Between those 4 projects, you've got 36 units. In addition to that, you have zoning in your B1 and B2 district that provides for the construction of affordable housing, so that should also contribute towards your unmet need. And then in addition to that, to sort of round out the credits that you'll be eligible for, towns are able to get 25% bonus credits if you, for example, provide family rental housing, if you provide excess very low income housing, and so forth, if you have sites that are near a train station, for example. I would anticipate that Ridgewood is going to be able to maximize its 25% rental bonus credits. So for the unmet need, as I said, most common, it's overlay inclusionary zoning, but you can also do by right zoning if you see a site that would be a good fit for affordable housing. Now, these unmet need mechanisms and any other mechanisms that we need to talk about for the RDP, you're going to see me again to talk about. Quite frankly, all of the, that kind of details about where new affordable housing, how exactly what terms a settlement might be included, or what terms might be included in a settlement agreement, all of that is subject to litigation. Quite frankly, I can't talk about that in open session, and we're not quite there. I don't have any secret ideas or discussions with Fair Share Housing Center, but as this process progresses, you'll see me back here to talk to you probably in executive session to get your input on how settlement might proceed, and then later back here in the public, in the open session to discuss the eventual housing element and fair share plan to seek public input on it. So speaking of the housing element, and so that's, up until now, I've talked a little bit about the history thus far, where you are today with your litigation and your credits, and now I want to get into what's anticipated in the future. So at some point, regardless of whether you settle or whether this goes to trial, we're going to have to do an adopted housing element and fair share plan. Important to understand is, even though the council is going to be driving this process in terms of the litigation, the housing element is actually a plan that's adopted by your planning board, and it becomes part of their master plan, very much like a land use element or a circulation element or a sustainability element. It becomes this master plan document that is owned by the planning board. However, after the planning board adopts it, it actually needs to come back to you guys for your endorsement, because while the planning board has the power to adopt it, make it part of the master plan, they don't have the power to then send it to court and seek their review and approval of it. That is something only the council can do. So you too will have an opportunity to be involved in this process. And not to mention the housing element and fair share plan, it needs to match that settlement agreement for which you'll be intimately involved with. So a housing plan, now I know you guys have done this many times, but for those of you that don't sit around at night reading your 1990, 2004, 2008 housing element, let me go through this very briefly. So the housing plan requirements are identified in the municipal land use law as well as in the Fair Housing Act. What it requires is that you go through and review all of your demographics and your employment data, and it's intended to give the town a good picture of what the housing stock is, who lives in town, and really to better understand what the needs are for affordable housing. Notwithstanding, you're still given a number by the court or COA that you must follow. So there is a little bit of a disconnect between your own demographic analysis and your ultimate obligation. But nonetheless, we're required to go through that, and it's actually a good piece of data for the town. We're also required to take a look at the probable affordable housing stock, and so to do so, we'll simply look at your approvals and what opportunities are identified as part of your vacant land adjustment. We'll also have a consideration for lands for affordable housing. That's going to include any site that's either planned or proposed for affordable housing. And beyond that, we really need to get into the implementation of how the obligation will be satisfied. So simply identifying what is each obligation and how you're going to satisfy it. What rehabilitation programs will the village participate in, and then what credits will be used to satisfy that prior round and third round RDP, as well as the unmet need. And then lastly, there are a number of administrative documents that need to be adopted. Includes a spending plan, so what affordable housing funds are collected and what it is that you want to spend them on. And then a variety of administrative documents such as the affordable housing ordinance, affirmative marketing plan, just to ensure that the affordable housing units that you have now and in the future will be administered properly, and very importantly, will continue to be eligible for credit, because quite frankly, let me tell you, it is a sad day when I have to tell a municipality that their units have been poorly managed and they're no longer eligible for credit for them. So that's one of the reasons why we adopt the ordinances, we adopt all the resolutions to make sure that not only now, but in 5 years and 10 years from now, you have staff, folks that have the resources available to tell them how to manage the units. So ultimately, this is the plan that I see moving forward, provided there's a settlement with Fair Share Housing Center. The first one is to simply have the court review, and to have, by the court I mean your special master, but also Fair Share Housing Center, to review the updated vacant land adjustment and also to verify credit. That will give us the ability to know exactly where we stand and what it is that we need to satisfy. So we want to know for certain, is that RDP 48 units? Is it going to have to increase or perhaps decrease, but more likely, if anything, increase? And all of those credits that I listed, such as the Ridgecrest Apartments, your group homes, I think they're eligible for credit because COA previously approved them, but quite frankly, we're in a new process here, and it's incumbent upon us to get that to be reviewed and preliminarily approved from the master and Fair Share at this point. It will help us understand where it is, understanding what we've done in the past and what's eligible for credit will help us understand exactly where we need to go in the future. As part of our settlement discussions with Fair Share, we'll be given our obligation for, and quite frankly, Fair Share is currently at 701 units. I'm not sure to what extent that may change over time. It seems as if that's the likely third round obligation if there's a settlement. But like I said, remember, there's no expectation that a municipality fully satisfies its unmet need. If we can get to a place where our RDP has been reviewed, our credits have been verified, and folks are preliminarily satisfied with what it is the village has done and will do to satisfy, to meet its affordable housing obligation, well, then it seems as if we're moving into crafting a settlement agreement. And that settlement agreement will, as I've alluded to, it will identify the obligation. It will preliminarily identify what the town will do to meet that obligation, and then it's going to set forth a number of timelines and implementation steps to make sure that the town that A, the settlement agreement is reviewed and approved by the court, that the town then goes ahead, adopts a housing plan, and then that housing plan is subsequently reviewed and approved by the court. So and then there are, beyond the court approval, there are some monitoring requirements to make sure that, every year, and generally every year, that the town is continuing to implement its affordable housing plan as set forth in its housing elements. Those monitoring provisions, folks might be interested to know, are not actually any different than that which was previously required when we had COA doing things. They required annual monitoring. This is really the court's replacement in requiring that as well. Once the housing settlement agreement is approved, as I said, we'll adopt a housing plan. That'll be approved by the court, and then you get that all-important judgment of repose and protection from builder's remedy litigation. That protection will run through the end of the third round, and so that will run between, upon the date which the court approves it, through July of 2025, in which case, I guess we'll be in the fourth round, and I'll presumably be talking to you again about what that fourth round obligation is, if you can imagine. But that's the work plan that I see. Now, if there's no settlement, instead of working on a settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing Center, we'll simply be involved in a trial. The court will determine the number. They'll say, Ridgewood, your third round number is X, and then we'll pick back up where it talks about doing a housing plan. Your planning board will adopt it, you guys will endorse it, and we'll go to the court for review and approval of that. So, as I said, in terms of your court approval or the court hearing, I do want to make clear that that is an additional opportunity for comment. So there's public comment available at the planning board, at the council, and then at the court, during which the court will, and people have an opportunity to comment as to whether or not that meets the rules. And then, as I said, that your judgment of compliance will require a number of things, but most importantly, it will give you immunity from builder's remedy litigation. So with that, what questions do you guys have?
Just let me pipe in. Thank you very much, but that's quite a bit of information. Just one correction, Bergen County has a housing rehabilitation program as well. And I think on your presentation, you mentioned Morris, but really we're looking at Bergen, but just, that'll be fine.
Great.
And, you know, if anybody has any questions, but it is quite a bit of material.
Should I go first? Thank you, great presentation.
My pleasure.
A lot of stuff to
I hope I didn't
consider.
overwhelm folks, I'm sorry.
It's okay. So when you define rehabilitation, would that also include complexes that are not part of our existing obligation, but maybe rehabilitating their development?
Yes, so the units that are eligible for the rehabilitation program actually can't be part of your existing inventory of affordable housing. So for example, the Ridgecrest Apartments wouldn't be able to get rehabilitation credit if all of the units were updated. So that's one component, but to answer your question, yes, complexes, if there's an apartment complex, if somebody owns 2 or 20 market rate units and wants to receive funds in order to upgrade, say, the windows and the heating system, they can do so provided they then apply a restriction to make sure that the units can only be rented to low and moderate income households in the future.
Okay, so how would we as a municipality find out if they've gone through that process, or can we compel them to go through that process?
I don't think you can compel them, but the good news is you don't have to. So for the RDP, municipalities must satisfy that obligation. That means we must be able to identify 1 unit for every credit or every portion of the obligation. So if you're 48 unit RDP, for example, we need to identify 48 units or maybe 36 units and some bonus credits, but you get the point. For the rehabilitation obligation, instead, the municipality simply needs to make the program available. So if you have a 53-unit rehabilitation obligation, well, quite frankly, if you have only 10 households if the program is well marketed so that folks know it's available, if you only have 10 households that come forward between now and 2025 that want to take the funds to rehabilitate their unit, that's perfectly fine. The obligation is to make the program available and to market it and to make it feasible should folks come forward, but you are not in any way, shape, or form obligated to knock on people's doors and say, I see your roof needs to be replaced. You're getting a new roof. That is simply not required.
Okay. And what is the lowest amount of units that could be considered affordable? Does it have to be like 2 to 4 family? Can it be 1 family that somebody?
There's no minimum threshold. Even if a single-family home was offered for rent, or just a single-family home as a home ownership, that's eligible. So quite frankly, most often the rehabilitation program works with existing homeowners. That's the most common applicant. So it's often somebody that, well, they have to be low or moderate income. It's often, but not always, a senior household that perhaps is on a fixed income, can't afford to update the roof, update the windows, say. Those are the most common folks that apply to the programs.
So they may be out there and we're just not aware of them, but they could certainly, especially for the seniors, be included in this number, and that could be something that we could disseminate information.
Absolutely. If there's I'm going to assume for the sake of this question that you're going to participate in the county and/or a municipal program. So what I would recommend upon getting that participation squared away, that you actually send a flyer and do some advertising throughout town to make sure that those households that are eligible know that it's available.
Okay. Thank you.
Beth, a question on the housing plan. Is there a deadline for that we have to get this thing done?
There will be a deadline, but it's not yet been set. So once the settlement agreement if there's a settlement agreement, it usually gives the town 120 days to adopt a housing plan. That said, included in the settlement agreement is a framework for what will be included in that plan. So I would say this is part of the process where we're going to have to start work. This is the start of the process where I'm going to start working with all of you to identify what those housing programs are. And by the time we have that 120-day deadline imposed upon the village, we should be well on our way to crafting that housing plan.
And just so everybody knows, there was an adopted housing plan back in 2015, which included the 4 CBD developments that have just been approved by the planning board. I think it also included the overlay zones for the east side of Route 17 South over by Racetrack Road. So it may be that we're, one of the things I think that's impressed the court is that we were ahead of the game with regard to those. Depending upon how, things fall out in terms of further discussions, it may need to be amended, but we will be given time to get that amended.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys have taken a huge step by doing that housing plan. Quite frankly, towns that did housing plans in 2015 or 16 in anticipation of this process have a much easier time. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Beth. I just want to be clear that although the third round obligation is still kind of up in the air, it could be between 540 and 701 units, but that's not the total units that would be built in the village of Ridgewood, because developers never really build all affordable, because then they wouldn't make any money. So we have a 20%, I believe, 20% or 15% set aside in each development. So you're talking about, literally, to meet 701 affordable unit obligation, thousands of apartments being built in the village of Ridgewood, and then you said there's going to be a fourth round. So is this just going to go on forever, and every 10 years or so they're going to say you need another 1,000 units of affordable until like it just gets so ridiculous that they have to scrap it or change it or make it realistic? Or, I mean, eventually you're going to end up having to build 30,000 units of housing in Ridgewood by 2080, and it's just going to keep adding up and being kind of
I hope to God that we at some point have a legislature or a state agency and a governor that wants to take this issue on and fix it, because quite frankly, municipalities are expending significant resources just on the administration. I mean, forget the cost of the affordable housing, just to I hate to say it, but just to frankly pay people like me and your special master and all of your other professionals involved is taking a huge amount of resources from municipalities. So I would like to think that we're going to have folks at the state level that say it's time for us to go back to a more reasonable circumstance. But I do, so yes, when we talk about an obligation for the town, if it's done through inclusionary housing, right, those affordable units are only going to be 20% or maybe 15% of the total number of units. That is 100% true. I just want to reiterate the fact that the town has already received, and we're going to continue to get that vacant land adjustment. So while, yes, that unmet need is just, with no state level intervention, is just going to be unchecked, and it's going to grow in the fourth round, and the fifth round, and the sixth round. But at no point do I ever expect Ridgewood to be required or expected to build even the full 229 unit prior round obligation.
And just so everybody knows in regard to that, one of the other expenses that courts have now placed on municipalities through the court's jurisdiction of the affordable housing mandate is to pay the legal fees for the Fair Share Housing Center. So the fact that we've gone ahead, done a housing element or a housing plan already, taken on all those other issues ahead of time, has really limited the amount of time that Fair Share has spent in the village in comparison to a lot of other communities. And it is a consideration which we discuss in closed about settlement versus trial. So, but Fair Share's legal fees are also one of those things we have to pay.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Beth.
Do you have any questions?
My questions are more regarding planning, because it seems like there's a lot of stuff up in the air. We don't know. It could be this, could be that. We're in the process now of revising our master plan. How much of this gets incorporated into that, gets baked into it in terms of, maybe giving us a better glimpse as to what the future potential could be in terms of units that can be generated?
Well, in a perfect world, I would say the village will do its master plan first, and then from there we'll stem the housing element and your affordable housing obligations and how we'll be satisfied. I can tell you for certain that the court is not going to allow your master plan process to play out. So unfortunately, what's going to have to happen is we're going to have to sit down and try to think as long-term and as comprehensively as possible as to how to meet your obligation. And then from there, your housing plan, or excuse me, your master plan is going to have to respond to what's included in the settlement agreement and what's included in the housing plan. It's an imperfect timing, it's an imperfect process, but unfortunately, it's the one that we're faced with.
And in terms of funding, because it seems like there's a lot of burdens being placed, particularly in municipalities. Obviously, Fair Share is running up its own share of legal bills. Where's the federal government weighing in terms of stepping in at all to defray some of those costs?
Absolutely none. The federal government has not, to my knowledge, hasn't recognized the situation in New Jersey. No. The state legislature has made some efforts at amending the Fair Housing Act. They haven't gone anywhere. There is hope that with a new governor, with the new legislature, that there might be some action, but I can't advocate for waiting for that to happen because it's very unclear as to whether or not, if they're going to take action, and whether or not it would be in time for it to make a difference in what we're involved with today.
Thank you.
So Beth, first, thank you. It was a remarkable presentation, and it's actually really great to work with you on so much of this. And I just want to thank Matt for clearing up that housing plan, because I know we worked tirelessly on that, a lot of late nights to get it in back in, I think it was 2015. So, but I just had one quick question. What is the criteria for a unit to be, an affordable unit to be placed back into the regular housing stock market rate? Is there any criteria for that to happen?
So how would an affordable unit, like a moderate or low-income unit, be turned into a market rate unit?
Yes. Is there like a time frame that it's in?
Yeah.
And, okay.
So in order to be eligible for an affordable housing credit, most units have to be restricted for 30 years. So at the conclusion of that 30-year deed restriction, the unit, depending on how the deed restriction is written, because there have been various models over the years, but at the end of the 30 years, either the unit automatically turns into a market rate unit, presuming the owner wants to go ahead and do so, or the municipality has to take an action to lift the controls. For older units, they typically turn over to market rate units automatically. But it's at the conclusion of 30 years, maybe 20 years, depending on when it was created. I'm sorry, there's never a straight answer for pretty much anything with affordable housing. But for any new units that we're creating today, 30 years.
Okay.
Just actually, just one more. So if you've built units today that are rentals, and later on you decide to sell them and turn to condominiums, what happens into those units?
Okay, so the deed restriction addresses a number of things. It addresses, A, that it's affordable at a certain income level, so it's a low-income unit, it's a moderate income, and so forth. It's also going to address whether it's a sale or rental unit, because we don't want it converting, especially if it's a rental unit, you don't want it converted to a sale unit, because quite frankly, you have that rental obligation. And so anything that's converted, you might actually lose rental credits, and you might actually lose rental bonus credits. So you could lose 2 credits if something was converted from a rental unit to a sale unit. So the deed restriction will cover all of that. And furthermore, beyond the deed restriction, there are other administrative documents that prevent the unit, for example, from making substantial changes. So there are even more regulations than what I went through today. Some of those include the number of bedrooms that have to be provided in an inclusionary project. So for example, there have to be a minimum number of 3-bedroom units. There are rules in place that would prevent them from making it a 2-bedroom unit, because you would lose that credit. So there are rules in place to address the bedroom and the unit configuration, but the deed restriction will address the income level and whether it's for sale or for rent.
I just have one more question. So further to that, so if we have a development, let's say, that has 20 rental units, and that development converts to condominium and they sell those 20 units, what is the process of, are they still getting approval for?
Those are all affordable units in the example?
Yeah.
So
let's say there's 100 and they sell, X amount off as market, and then price and sell those as affordable. Would that be permitted?
if they convert rental units to sale, if they convert affordable rental units to affordable sale units, I would say they're in violation of their deed restriction, unless the deed restriction was written in such a way that I haven't seen. But it would typically be in violation of the deed restriction.
So if they already own the properties, how is that going to be put into the deed?
It's like an existing affordable unit?
So yeah, well, we don't have any existing units yet. They're yet to be built. So do those deeds already have that element in them?
for anything that's been approved but not yet constructed, is that what you're
Correct.
thinking of?
Yeah, yeah.
The deeds for that have not been, I don't think they've been drawn up yet.
Okay, so it will be a separate and standalone deed for those specifically for the development of the affordable housing element?
Yeah, so for a rental project, it typically has a master deed, and it would say something like, of the, of the 20 units, 4 of them will be affordable, they're units 1, 2, 3, and 4, 2 of them will be low income, 2 of them will be moderate income, and they'll have these, and they'll all be for rent. And it's a 4-page document, but the deed restriction would identify the units, the income, and the tenure, so sale or rent.
And will we have any approval or review of that? Like, will Matt have the ability to review it?
I would fully expect that your professionals are going to have review of it. It would be improper for a developer to file those deeds without having had a
Without
review
Matt
from the
reviewing
village
them.
council.
Okay,
And that still is going to be subject to, I mean, it's going to be required by the courts, and it's still going to be subject to review by us. Fair Share is going to have a review of it.
okay,
And if it's a rental unit, and we're counting on that because we have to provide a certain percentage of rental units in our affordable stock, if they try and take that out of there, it's not only in violation of, it's in violation of our program, our whole housing element. And I would certainly feel very comfortable in stating that we'd be able to prevent it from happening.
yeah, because I think, wasn't there up in Mawa, didn't they have that challenge a few years back with Mount Laurel, with the units there, where some of them converted from rental to sale, and then in the last market downturn, there were some foreclosures, and they came back into the market population?
I didn't hear about that, but I will say there are a lot of towns that are having trouble with units as a result of the downturn in the market. So there are a lot of folks that own sale units that aren't able to sell them because, quite frankly, a market rate unit might have a price that's not too dissimilar from a moderate income unit, depending on where you are in the state. Or they're simply having trouble renting. So I'm not surprised to hear that story, but I haven't heard that specifically.
Yeah.
So I just have one more question on that, in that vein. So we've worked hard to have included in our affordable units special needs. And so that 30-year deed restriction then is also applied to those particular units. And okay.
Yes. There are some exceptions with special needs that I won't get into, but anything newly created that's special needs should be subject to 30 years.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, good. So did anybody else have any questions from the audience? So Martin, if you just don't mind, if you want to just limit it to 1 or 2 questions, you could just come up to the microphone.
Good evening. Do you need to know where I live? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, Martin Walker, 114 Cottage Place. I have a fairly specific question about how this plan could evolve specifically for Ridgewood, but I guess I want to sort of frame it, by saying that, in my personal opinion, the fair housing requirements that exist in the state of New Jersey are a very favorable aspect of living in the state of New Jersey. I think it's one of the most progressive states in the country, and I think the quality of life and the education results from that is very high. The other thing the way I want to frame my question is because we're working on this master plan towards that, we have yet as a town to figure out what are all the stakeholder interests that can go to a fairly clear prediction of where we all want to be as a town. But Ridgewood does have certain characteristics that are pretty unique to it. And I guess the way I would say this is, and I would ask you as an expert in this regard, is that, as the council well knows, my number one concern about the evolution of our community has to do with the lack of affordability for people who don't have children because of the high tax rates and the high cost of housing. And there are a number of communities in the country that have tried to address this directly, particularly in suburban communities. You may be familiar with changes in laws in Montgomery County that try to address this around, number one, trying to remove available land from the possibility of any development.
Martin, I'm sorry, Martin, I don't mean to cut you off. Just for the sake of time, if
Can
you
I
have a
get to my
question,
question?
can you make it a quick question?
Yeah.
Okay, thank
Well,
you.
no, because my question is, can the current methods that are being used to create sustainable, multi-age, diverse communities, can those be adopted in such a way as to satisfy housing obligations? So you mentioned land, the other ones are rezoning to allow in-law apartments on every property, and then restricting housing to over 55. And how does over 55 distinguish itself from the senior, requirement there?
So the short answer is yes. A town really can, for towns that choose to, you can use this process to really look at, and I think it's something that Ridgewood has done historically and that we're continuing to do today, to look at what type of housing in the community is necessary, not only to meet its constitutional obligation, but to provide that diversity in the community. And so when we talk about diversity, we talk about at the forefront is income diversity, so making sure that there's room for wealthy households, that's your market rate housing, all the way down to your very low income households. But additional diversity is defined in the Mount Laurel Doctrine as senior housing, and that's the 55 years and older. But of course, it's limited. There are a lot of towns that would love to simply provide housing for low and moderate income seniors, but the Fair Housing Act and COA's rules have stepped in place and said, no, it's limited to 25%. Beyond seniors, it also extends to special needs households. And so you've got a full range of populations that are eligible for low-income housing, and actually Ridgewood is a good example of trying to take advantage of these rules to provide affordable housing for not only seniors and not only special needs, but also for families in the communities to, I think, help achieve exactly what you're talking about, making sure that Ridgewood is available to folks regardless of their income, and so that people can use perhaps affordable housing as a way to step up in the community.
Just briefly.
No, Martin, I'm going to let somebody else come on up and ask. Let me, Martin, excuse me. I'm going to take one more question and then we're going to wrap up. So if there's anyone else who has a question, Denise, state your name and address if you don't mind.
Sure. Denise Lima, 319 East Glen Ave. Are there protocols on who we can give the affordable housing to? Or do we have to open it up to everybody? Said differently, can we give it to the Ridgewood residents first, or must it be an open attendance?
So it's a little bit in the middle. Municipalities are not allowed to have a municipal preference, which I think is what you're asking about. A lot of folks would quite rightfully say, we'd like to reserve our affordable housing first for people that either live or work in the community. Unfortunately, that's something that is prohibited in the law, and so instead, towns have to market it to their region. And so if you remember from the income limitations, you can see that Ridgewood is in Region 1, but that includes Bergen, Passaic.
But it's big.
What's that?
It's large. It's a large area.
Yes, it's a 4-county area. So when we talk about when we talk about marketing the units, you need to advertise the units to those 4 counties, to folks in those 4 counties. Beyond that, the municipality is not able to select a preference for folks beyond, whether it's a senior unit or special needs unit.
So I asked that question because we're all focused on where are our seniors going to be, right?
Yeah, no, and it's a question that we bandy back and forth and grapple with an awful lot, but
Yeah.
I appreciate it. It's a great question. Thanks, Denise.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, all right. So again, thank you, Beth. We really
pleasure.
appreciate your time, you coming in tonight, and I think it was really very informative and helpful for not just the council, but for the public at large. So thank you very much.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, our first discussion item is under budget. This is an award of a contract for telecommunications hardware and software for our water pollution control facility. The water pollution control facility lost telecommunications with most of our sanitary pump stations recently. Village wishes to connect the pump stations to our fiber optic emergency communications network. Ridgewood Water Company has done just this with their wellhead facilities to their monitoring location. They've utilized the village's fiber optic emergency communications network and are pleased with its reliability. So based on the feedback from the water department, Mr. Rudisalzer is recommending the purchase of the requisite equipment from Emerson Process Management to connect the village's 6 sewer pump stations to the plant via the fiber network. This will cost $71,000, and it is available in the capital budget. It's essential that our sanitary sewer pump stations has telecommunications so that we know if there are failures or there are issues with them. We're discussing this prior to the rest of the agenda so that we can adopt this resolution, so we can award the contract and move forward with this project.
Okay. Any questions?
Does this go through the bid process, or does it go through the bid process?
It is not a bid process because it's emergency.
Okay, so you don't have to go through the bid process?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And I just had one question. What is the time frame to actually start to finish, to have this completed and up and running?
I'm going to have Mr. Rudisalzer come up because I don't know the answer to that one.
Roughly, we won't hold you to a date and time.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As soon as we get the resolution from the clerk's office, we'll issue a contract to the vendor and we'll initiate the purchase. We've already started some of the work. Traffic and Signal has started some of the trenching to run fiber to the Ridgewood Lawns pump station by Hall School. We're also running fiber where we don't have enough to connect the pump station. That's on their work list right now.
Any other questions? Okay. Very good, thank you.
Okay.
So I guess we'll have a motion to suspend the work session and convene a special public meeting.
So moved. Second.
Hache?
Yes.
Seaton?
Yes.
Boyd?
Yes.
Walsh?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by posting on the bulletin board in Village Hall, by mail to the Ridgewood News, the Record, and by submission to all persons entitled, the same as provided by law of a schedule, including the date and time of this meeting. Roll call.
Councilman Hache?
Here.
Councilman Boyd?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Seaton?
Here.
Councilwoman Walsh?
Here.
Mayor Knutson?
Here.
Following resolution number 17328 will be adopted by a consent agenda with one vote by the Village Council. The resolution will be read by title only. 17-328, award contract, telecommunications equipment for water pollution control facility, sanitary sewage pump stations, hardware and software, not to exceed $71,000. I have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Hache?
Yes.
Seaton?
Yes.
Boyd?
Yes.
Walsh?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes. Motion to adjourn special public meeting and reconvene work session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Okay, and with that, we're back. Okay,
Welcome
good.
back.
All right, moving on
Okay.
to water.
Our next item is under Ridgewood Water. We have water utility interest rates. This mirrors our interest rates based on our tax bills. So it's for the first $1,500, it's an interest rate of 8%. 18% is charged on balance over $1,500. There's a 30-day grace period for all bills, and it's a 6% per annum penalty on any fiscal year delinquency in excess of $10,000.
Questions, comments?
The next one is the water administrative fees. This is also an annual resolution. In lieu of taxes, Ridgewood water properties are charged an administrative fee. It's based on the land value assessed on these properties, exclusive of the improvement value at the current year's tax rate. The payments are made quarterly to the tax collector.
Questions or comments?
Yeah, Heather, the attachment in the back, Schedule A, is that the amount we're collecting, or is that the land value? I couldn't.
That's the amount.
Oh, that's the amount being collected.
Well, yeah, right.
Okay.
That's the assessed value.
Okay, so that's
It would, it says shall be calculated annually by multiplying the assessed value of the properties listed by the current year's property tax rate. So this is the assessed value, then we take the property tax rate and multiply that.
Got it.
And then that's how we determine how much is owed.
Okay, and then that's quarterly, right?
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, moving on.
Okay, the next one is for awarding an additional contract for infrared asphalt surface and miscellaneous repairs. Our engineering division currently uses J. Fletcher Kramer Construction, who was the low bidder for infrared asphalt repair, asphalt trench patching. So when we open up the street opening permit and then we have to pave it, we use this infrared asphalt, which restores it not to new, but close to new, so that it's smooth to drive on. Ridgewood Water Company has recently been doing a lot of replacement of various mains and been doing a lot of work in the streets, and they also would like to participate in this bid, and so they estimate that they'll probably spend up to $200,000 because they are doing so much work. So they'd like to do an additional award of $200,000 to the same contractor, J. Fletcher Kramer Construction, and their funding is available. It basically, as I said, it does restore the streets to a like-new condition after an excavation has been made, and is also to repair excavations done under Village Street opening permits where the contractor failed to satisfactorily close up the street.
Questions or comments?
Okay. The next one is a change order for Lafayette Reservoir improvements. The J. Meyer Group was awarded the contract back in June of this year, and this rehabilitation, it's a rehabilitation of Lafayette Reservoir improvements. It's necessary to comply with the U.S. EPA administrative consent order. At this time, an additional $52,020 is required, and it includes work beyond the original scope. This includes landscaping and site work in order to remove and replace approximately 1,000 linear feet of fence surrounding the property as per a previous Homeland Security audit. This is awarded again to the original contractor, G. Meyer Group, out of Bradley Beach, New Jersey. It's a 15% increase in contract price, and the funding is available in the water capital budget.
Any questions?
Yeah, is this recent, the administrative order, that, and we just didn't know about it? Or?
This is probably, we're under NJDEP and US EPA administrative orders for about the past 2 years,
Okay.
approximately. So this is probably one of the improvements within those orders.
Yeah, we just, I guess from a budgeting standpoint, we just
Well, we undertake certain, it's all in their capital budget, and they continue to increase the capital, do new projects with each year's capital budget. And certain requirements have certain deadlines.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure when this particular deadline is, but you know, it's all working within the guidelines set forth by DEP and EPA. I know that Mr. Calby and his staff, and I've been attending as well, meet with those representatives every 6 months, and they go over the checklist to see what's been done, what's been accomplished, what's been moving forward, if something's stalled, why is it stalled, to make sure that we keep to the timeline that they've set. Okay.
Moving on.
The next is under parking, and the first and second kind of go together, the Hudson Street Parking Garage funding and the Hudson Street Parking Garage design criteria. I'm going to have Mr. Rooney, who's the Parking Utility Director, come up to the table in case there are questions or he wants to add any information for the council's benefit.
Good evening.
Good evening. So just to bring us up to speed, we're talking about just the funding of the garage and how we could proceed with that. And I, just for the record, I think we still don't have the Walker report, and when will we be receiving that? Or do we have an idea?
So I anticipate receiving that in the next 2 weeks. Just to trace back some steps as to when Walker generated the report for the first time. Some of the key things that they generated, which is going to be important to see how we're going to fund this going forward, is to understand the need for rate increases. Okay, so at that time when they did the first pass, we generated, they suggested we generate a 25-cent increase up to 75 cents for core district parking, and that would be 6 months prior to construction beginning. Once the garage was completed, they then recommended that that rate be increased to $1 in the core area, and 75 cents in the surrounding areas. They also came up with suggestions on new sources of revenue. For example, as these developments are going through and there is no place for people to park anymore in, say, Ken Smith lot, they need to come out to the street. So they generated those numbers that would say, okay, we now have increase in revenue because we have additional needs for the parking. They also talked about extending the hours, either to 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. So where I'm getting at here is that there's a lot of information that Walker's going to be providing to us, and until we get that, it's going to be difficult to see where we're going to be moving forward as to how this garage is going to be funded. So in addition to this, when we had a presentation from Pike, they also talked about a financing arrangement that would be possibly acceptable to us should we want to take that route instead of bonding the cost ourselves. That is, I've reached out to bond counsel to make certain that we could comply with all the requests that they made for that financing. And they had suggestions of anywhere between 7 years and 25 years. So weighing that against the cost of money today, my projections are they're coming out very close. But the key part here is that we're going to have to provide a down payment for this project out of the parking utility. And that requires that we be self-liquidating. We will not be self-liquidating. We haven't been self-liquidating. We've been self-liquidating last year. This year, we're going to be just about breaking even on revenues. The main reason is the extensive use of Park Mobile, which I've said during our quarterly reports. We lose roughly 30 cents on the dollar when people use Park Mobile. So that's taking away our revenue stream by about 30%. If I add 30% back, I'm at what I anticipated in my budget. So between now and the end of the year, you know, we got to keep a close eye on where we are with this thing to find out how this is going to play out. So with that being said, the down payment that would be required if we assumed an $11 million ordinance for constructing a garage, we would need about $550,000. So that $550,000 will have to come out of parking utility, and if we don't have sufficient revenues to pay for it going forward, it's something that we would have to consider raising in the general budget. What that number is, I don't know, because it's going to be predicated on what source of revenues we'll have available to us. So if Walker comes back with a scenario that says if you were to raise rates January 1, let's say, to 25 cents, and you project that you're going to introduce an ordinance or adopt an ordinance and begin construction by July 1, the revenue stream that's going to be generated by that will add to the amount of money available to us in revenue if local government would allow us to anticipate that money based upon their report, and that would eliminate or ease the pain of having to raise $550,000 through another source. So I don't know if I confused you, if I helped you.
Bob, just one quick question. If the parking fee is paid by the end user, how does the village lose money for using Park Mobile through the parking fees?
The agreement we have with them is that they take a percentage or a transaction fee from us in addition to what the user pays. So the user, that 35 cents has nothing to do with me. That's between the user and Park Mobile. The agreement that we have is that they take a percentage, roughly, like I said, it's a 30% charge on all the transactions.
So for example, on a 50-cent an hour park, they get a 70%.
We get 70%.
So they're getting 35 cents, and then they're getting 30% from us as well?
Correct.
Jeez.
The good news is the contract's up in February of 18, and we'll be going out to bid.
Okay.
We'll negotiate a better deal this time.
Yes, we will. That contract was before Bob.
Yeah, especially if we're increasing our rates. That's a windfall.
Right.
Questions, Jeff?
Yeah, so, Bob, when is the Walker report going to be ready?
It's supposed to be in the next 2 weeks. I'll have a draft.
Okay, and then,
So we're hoping, let me just say, we're hoping to bring that to the council at their December work session.
oh, good, okay. So you're looking to raise about $550,000. We're going to need it fairly acutely. Is that? or no?
Assuming $11 million, again, the other part of this is knowing the exact construction cost
Yeah.
before we do the ordinance, because that will determine what the down payment's going to be.
Yeah, so that $550,000 that we need, I mean, how much time are we going to have to be able to accumulate those dollars? Do we have 6 months? Do we have 9 months? Do we have a year? What do we have?
Well, there's two scenarios. If Walker states that we can, they project that we can raise X number of revenue in, say, 6 months. And we go and we do the paperwork and get the ordinance done to raise the rates, whatever has to be done internally, and make it effective. We can then go to Trenton, to local government, before we adopt our budget and say, we have a report that stipulates that we can raise the, do this, X, Y, and Z if we do this, and we've done it. We'd like consideration to raise that money in our budget. So let's say it's $500,000, it'd be a wash. There wouldn't be any impact on anything. But if it's only $250,000, then we have to talk about what we're going to do, raise that in the general fund budget, or we're going to modify expenses in parking, because we had a few projects that we budgeted for this year that, we're using money for. We may not have the ability to do that next year. Depends on where we are.
So, we generally, I know this is not the right term, but we generally have, I'm going to say it's a surplus out of the parking utility every year, or so, $500,000, give or take, right?
Okay. You're partially right. Going back to 2015, when we recovered the losses, we had over $1 million in the budget, but we were allowed to repay the general fund for all the years that we had those deficits. So in effect, we're just about paid back now. Okay. So that's what we got in from the insurance is now gone back to the general fund to satisfy the losses.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, you had said we're short based on the fact that we're losing just a lot of money with Park Mobile. I mean, that's eating into the kind of the income. I mean, how much are we losing from Park Mobile? I mean, on a yearly basis now, that if we kind of redid the contract, we...
Well, since we've started, okay, we've paid them $143,000. So that's from May of 15.
Wow.
A lot of money.
And that's just our, I'm sorry, Joe, that's just our end, that's not what they received from the end user?
Correct.
Okay.
That's from us.
Yeah, so it would be nice if we could restructure
Yes.
that.
Now, I do know that, matter of fact, when I was doing the research on the kiosk, there is a company out there that has a mobile app that works with the vendor that we chose that charges $0. But I don't know enough about what else is behind it, but it's certainly one we're going to research.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. So when are we going to get our first kiosk so we can see how these things work?
It should be in operation right before Thanksgiving. I'm shooting for the Monday before Thanksgiving.
Okay, that's good. So then we could start looking into their mobile application, and if it works for us, when February comes around, then theoretically we wouldn't have to negotiate anything really with Park Mobile. We could just use, we could use that kiosk or have a partial agreement, or if the kiosk works out really well and give it a few more months, we could go to kiosks. And that would that also increase just overall revenue because it's a kiosk, and then there wouldn't be any leftover time on parking or anything like that?
Well, you still have merchant service agreements for credit cards. Don't forget, this is the first time we're going to be allowing the use of credit cards to make the consumer, have more flexibility. So we don't know, we have an agreement with Valley, which is very lucrative to our part, but we don't know how that's going to work, how much credit card usage we're going to have.
And what the fee would be?
Correct. The fees are small compared to Park Mobile.
Okay. Well,
but we've had to use Park Mobile with the kiosk right now because that's who we have the contract with.
Right.
So we couldn't put another one in place and really confuse people. So we stayed with Park Mobile. There are many vendors that they work with, one of which doesn't charge a fee, so we're going to take a look at that.
So then you have time to see how well the kiosk works, and you can research their mobile application, and then hopefully by February or March we could have a better idea.
Right. So this is a 6-month program, so it'll continue through April, but we'll put out an RFP probably in the next month to get some feedback on these vendors and what they want to charge and how that's going to work.
Okay, now I remember from the presentation from Pike that their estimate for their garage was $8.5 million. So again, we would need to know what the price of the garage is before we could start to contemplate a down payment or bonding, really, or any kind of financing.
Absolutely. And again, part of what council will need to decide is what it's going to look like, you know. So all those little things we have to address with whoever we select to do that project.
Right, and then we would have to have those discussions relatively soon to decide whether or not we would either want to go with Pike or we'd want to open it up to other developers or firms out there. So we'd have to go out, bring them in, and then there'd be public presentations of their concepts and their designs, and they would have a price. And it'd be very similar to what happened in 2007 when that council was contemplating a garage on North Walnut Street. They declared it an area in need of redevelopment. They brought in 5 different builders. They all had various presentations and prices, and the council went with one, and then that fell through because there's not a garage on North Walnut Street. But hopefully that last part wouldn't happen here, and we could go in one direction or the other. So I would have to probably come down from us. That decision would probably have to come down relatively soon.
So again, now that we've moved forward in the direction we have, we can negotiate with whomever we decide to move forward with.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Walsh? So the new Walker report that we're going to be receiving is not only going to take into account the on-street parking and the other lots, it's also going to take into account the potential revenue from inside the garage based on the number of spots that we had discussed at the last meeting.
So there's 2 reports. The first one is the financial feasibility study, which has to be completed before we complete the second one. Although they're running simultaneously, we have to come to agreement on the first one, on the cost section and what the revenue is. Once that's done and we give them the okay, they press the button and we'll have the information for the usage of the garage and what the distribution should be on commuters and you know, shoppers and whatever.
Right. So are they going to give us a couple of scenarios in that, like if, then, you know, that type of a...
Right. The key is just getting the first piece done.
Okay.
Because that's the basis for it.
Okay. And then as far as Walker is concerned, will they give us any suggestions as a go-forward plan, or are they just giving us the financial data?
No, they'll incorporate suggestions. The process, the way it worked the last time, was we get a draft, and then we may challenge the draft. We may say, which we did the last time, they left out, for example, 2 streets that we would consider core parking. So they had to go back and revise that. So, you know, there's an exchange of data to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But in that, they also will make suggestions as to, you know, what should happen. For, as I said earlier, the timetable for rate increases, you know, operating expenses, you know, key points when you have to focus on increasing operating expenses by 5% instead of 3%. So they will come up with different scenarios that we'll be able to work with and get some good ideas.
Okay. All right, that's all I had. Councilman Hache?
So, I mean, it's been a long road. I think a lot of people, there's been a lot of criticism. I think the expectations were set unrealistically that we would have a garage, you know, within a couple of months. It's a long process. There's a whole due diligence that goes into it, and I'm glad we've gone through the steps. I think the most important one was to first determine the appropriate size of what should go on that lot, because it was determined that what was proposed earlier wasn't the appropriate size. Then that would take us to, you know, just in terms of the number of spaces that fit on that lot. Then we get to now having an indication. I know Deputy Mayor said 8.5 million. I think ended up being a little bit higher when you put in all the aesthetics element into it. So then we get from what goes on there, what fits, what it will cost, and then we get now to the feasibility study. Because basically the previous Walker report is irrelevant because we were now talking about 240 spots fitting in that location as opposed to 400 plus. So the feasibility study, the Walker report, is now really the missing piece of the puzzle here.
Correct.
You know, and the new Walker report will essentially tell us what we can cover in terms of financing and operating costs through the parking utility to finance this garage. And whatever it can cover, that's essentially our funding gap. Right? And that funding gap has to be made up somewhere. And wherever the money comes from, I mean, I must say I'm opposed to levying any additional burden or tax on the taxpayer to make this happen. And anyone who assumes that the only way to cover this is through increasing meter rates or extending meter hours is also assuming that the Ridgewood residents don't come into a downtown to park. Because essentially, if parking was previously 50 cents an hour and now you're making it more, you're now taxing, and it's not actually a tax, but it is a tax. My suggestion would be to sit down with our businesses, with our residents, and there's something we actually had discussed in CBDAC in terms of bringing these forums together to bring our business owners and to really have, bridge the gap in many cases between the business community and the residents and figure out how we can help fund that gap and see how the businesses can do to kick in. And this is not reinventing the wheel. We've done this before. I mean, case in point, Maple Field. The community felt that it was important to have a facility for sports, so the sports groups and residents that were supportive of them got together and raised the money. And we didn't require the businesses to kick any money in. Some did voluntarily, but we didn't require that from them. So I think a good exercise would be to start engaging in that conversation. But again, we can't talk to that unless we know what the funding gap is.
Correct.
Because one of the things is that, taxing, sort of increasing the rates only, if that's the only way, I don't think it would work because it's essentially a double tax. We're already, as a village of Ridgewood, going to have to bond for this thing, so it's already being placed on the shoulders of the taxpayer. And additionally, by increasing the rates, it becomes a double tax. So I would think that, and we also have to be, the caveat with meter rates is, if you look at our meter rates today, they're some of the lowest in the state. I mean, I remember talking to several vendors, and they laugh when they hear that we charge 50 cents an hour. It's laughable to them, but when in the context of the surrounding towns, most of the towns don't charge for parking. All the on-street parking is free. We have to be very careful that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. Right. Also, because we price ourselves out. The mall's still free, Tice's Corner's still free. So that, there are other options out there. So I think we have to be very careful in how we strike that balance in terms of, increasing the rates. And also, talking to the businesses to see how they can kick in to make up that difference, whether it's an assessment or whatever it is. So I'm very anxious to see the result of that Walker report so that we can now have the missing piece of the puzzle and figure out what that actual funding gap is.
Right.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Councilman Hache because there's a tipping point on those meter rates, and the biggest competition obviously is online, free shipping, free return, free everything. And so now you weigh on balance what that number is, and how does it continue to be sustainable and encouraging people to come and shop downtown.
And just to add one more thing, and this is now, it's going to require a lot of talking, a lot of different scenarios. Great project for our special task force to, nibble on this, right? Once we have that piece, and then to figure out then what is the balance and how do we get there. I think this is, in terms of the key projects to work on, this is it.
Well, what we did the last time was we actually had other individuals from the then FAC look at and audit it and challenge it. They provided feedback and were in agreement basically with the concept that they came up with. So this will go out to as many eyes as needed to make sure that we vet the numbers correctly.
Bob, just what, that Park Mobile number, the Park Mobile usage represents what percentage of the total?
Total revenue?
Yeah. And I guess like what percentage are, are we 50-50, people dropping coins, people using Park Mobile, where are we at?
So it's about 200,000 out of, well, I'm sorry, I don't have that answer only because my revenue number includes permits as well. It's not just the coinage. I can get you that number, though.
Yeah, I think it's an important number to have.
Yep.
Okay, all right. All right, any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
So did you want to talk about the garage design, or it's pretty much set back from where?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have jumped on that. So if we were to do, I think as the deputy mayor pointed out, I guess like an RFP for, a request for proposal on a garage design, and we implemented or added the criteria, I'll call it a wish list. What would the time frame be to have that out and then responded to, and so what are we looking at in terms of turnaround time?
It's usually around, from the time of publication to the time of coming to the council, it's anywhere from, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks. Is that about right? I would say. Because by the time it's advertised, and it has to be out there for, a good 10 days at least, then we have to accept it, then it has to go to the next council work session, then it has to go to a public meeting after that. So, maybe it could be shortened a little bit, but, maybe 5 weeks, I don't know.
So if we were to do a draft of an RFP for our next meeting, we could have an idea of what everyone's comfort level.
Well, we need to know what you want in order
Right.
to create the RFP. So if you want to discuss that now, then we could possibly have something available.
Yeah, I think we
Okay.
could discuss it
Okay.
now. Anybody wants to jump in and discuss, the obvious, that it fits on the lot without encroaching onto the sidewalk or the street is the first, and that it's a height that is aesthetically and in terms of mass appropriate to the immediate surrounding streetscape.
Well, yeah, I believe, I believe we've sort of arrived there generally with, it seems to be generally accepted that if it fits on the lot, that's good. And if it's 3 stories with 4 levels of parking, that's pretty much, I think what, 4 stories and 5 levels of parking and taking up the street, obviously last time was too big because that was voted down overwhelmingly in a binding referendum. So what we came up with next was a design that fit on the lot, 3 stories, 4 levels of parking. So I think that would be it. I mean, there'd be some other details, but I think they're really the big, impactful things that we generally have agreement on.
Yeah, I think so far, one of the other major elements in terms of keeping the cost down was making it an open structure without the requirement of fire suppression.
Correct.
And the other, things that will make it very, very costly. So I think that took care, at least from a cost standpoint, I think a significant amount of money off the project. So.
And I think that included the firewall, if I recall, that being too close, so it had to have the accessibility to the other parking, the rear parking for the Ridgewood Avenue shops. And
You couldn't be closed on any side, otherwise you had to have ventilation. Right.
Yeah, and there was a distance, my recollection is there was a proximity to the adjacent property line and structures that would require the difference between the firewall and no firewall.
Right.
Notwithstanding any fire suppression, dry barrel or whatever. And what about the availability of any financing? Do we have any thoughts on that? Because I think that the deputy mayor just pointed out that Pike made that option available during their presentation. And if that's something, not that we're requiring that, but...
We can have it as an option.
You can have it as an option.
Okay.
I think that's a way for someone to come in and sweeten the deal. One thing is, for construction, in theory, anybody can construct a structure. But if we're talking about now finding a more creative way to finance, and whether it's, and I think one of the things that was discussed was some sort of lease in the initial time period, and then eventually taking possession. I think it's worth taking a look. And again, doesn't mean that if you're a construction company, you got to have your own finance company. We leave it up to them to kind of bring those solutions to the table. Certainly wouldn't hurt, to see what our options are.
So the number of spaces we had, I guess the Pike design was what, 240,
It was
250?
240, right?
40, yeah.
240? Okay.
So that's what you would want to aim for, right, in that
And that's
vicinity, in that
number,
area,
Yeah,
right?
240 was was sort of the conventional number. If we needed to get a little bit more creative in terms of some of the spots that we can create near the corners, we probably could have eked out another, maybe 5, 10 spots. But the other thing that we're talking about also, if we weren't going to get that creative and trying to come up with those extra spots, we could use some of the areas that are less than optimal for entry and exit to maybe put bike racks or motorcycle spaces and so on. So,
And just be mindful that and just going back, because it's our current frame of reference, obviously, is the Pike design. But that particular design allowed us to pick up all the on-street spaces that we were losing with the other designs. And so we were actually able not only to retain, but to increase. And those are the most valuable of all the spaces. So there was that benefit there, too.
So what we want to state is that we want to maintain all of the on-street spaces, correct?
Actually expand upon, because when we close those added driveways, because remember, I think is it 3 or 4, 4 of them, there were actually 4.
Right.
curb cuts.
Right, curb
Right.
cuts, and,
Right.
and those are pretty they're big curb cuts too. So we gain all of that back. I think for me, the most important piece, because I'm such a visual person,
Aesthetics, right.
is aesthetics,
Yeah.
is that it has to be kind of reflective of the architecture and the aesthetics of the streetscape and the area.
Right.
Heather, how many spots do we have on that street? And
Offhand, I don't know.
on Hudson? No, on both sides?
No, I
Any-
don't know
any idea?
offhand. I can get that for you.
Yeah. And we're not going to lose any of those?
Well, that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
We may
No, I get
gain,
it.
actually.
Yeah, we may gain. And the other
We're
thing
not
that...
losing, we're adding,
Right,
right?
we're adding. And the other thing you have on that street, which I think, and I've said this before, and as someone who drives a big Suburban, on Ridgewood Avenue, we have the parking boxes. I think you absolutely need them on Ridgewood Avenue because you need to make that turn very quickly, else you might get rear-ended by a bus or something. But on a side street like Hudson, which is not that busy, maybe we might even look at whether or not we need the grid boxes. We might be able to pick up a couple of spaces just by eliminating those.
I know Bob's laughing because I've been arguing to get rid of those boxes for years now.
Ridgewood
I
Avenue,
can't-
please keep
I was like 100 extra parking spaces downtown because people can't park a Suburban, which I can quite comfortably. So even with a bus right next to me, I'd be good. Okay, anybody else have any other? Okay.
Okay,
All right.
so we can see what we can do about putting together a draft RFP for you to look at next week.
Okay, great.
And then, if everything's good, then we could go out for, advertising. Okay?
Great, thank you.
Okay. So the next item under parking are the 2018 parking permits. Basically, what we've done is taken what exists today, and I'll just go through it quickly. The $1,000 Ridgewood residents only at the train station, Hudson, Prospect, Park and Ride, and all lots. What we would do this year is limit it to 210, and it would be on a first-come, first-served basis, because this was the issue we ran into
Right.
this past year, is that we didn't know that they would fill up so quickly, and then we had to limit them because we were out of spots, basically, for commuters at these locations. So, again, that's my recommendation, is we limit it to 210. People will advertise it that way, we'll tell people that, and it's first come, first served for these premium spots.
Heather, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So we sold out of the $1,000 ones?
Yeah, very early on, maybe in February.
And how many of those do we have?
Well, this year, we have like 213. That's where we stopped it,
Okay. And-
because of the spots availability.
So it sounds like there's a keen demand.
Obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
They want to be closer to the train station. I mean, that's
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I
So-
mean, that might be something we want to think about as far as maybe in the future, just finding some additional spots, the price of 1,000, if there's that demand.
But I think it's because of the proximity to the train station. I think, I mean, if we have another lot in that area,
Just a
sure.
thought.
Yeah, like a
But
parking garage.
35 extra spots at the train station.
And I think just in terms of the exercise of this, I think that this actually worked out well because they did sell out, and we were able to accommodate those individuals that purchased them comfortably.
Right, but there were more that wanted to purchase them.
Yes.
And we had a few waiting lists because we weren't sure how far up we could go.
Right.
So we felt comfortable with 210 because we were able to accommodate that. So I wouldn't go above that, honestly. So the next tier is the 750, that's Ridgewood residents only at Chestnut, Walnut, Cottage, and the Park and Ride lot. Free is if people want to park at the Ridgewood train station and they get the train sticker, they can get as many as they want. It's for Ridgewood residents only. They can pay by cash, coin, or they can pay by Park Mobile. Obviously, the other option is to get the RPP so they don't have to pay that way. 750 is a non-resident in the Park and Ride lot only. And the final one was 1,500, which is non-resident in the Cottage Place lot only. So, my recommendation would be to leave the rates as they are and to, people I think are used to them now. And as I said, we will certainly make them aware if the council's in agreement with these rates and these recommendations. We'll make everyone aware about the limited number of $1,000 premium spot hang tags. I guess we'll start with the parking permits and then we'll move on to meters.
Well, I think this might be kind of a premature conversation because I think, again, we're missing a piece here, which is a Walker report, which means that we're going to have, what are we using now, 60 spots on Hudson Street for commuters. We're also going to have 60 less spots to sell. So we need to figure out also that into the equation. In terms of, the repricing, would that affect the RPPs? Is there only going to be meter spots? And then also, what are we counting on in terms of inventory of available spaces to sell? Already we're going to start with 60 less. The demands will actually increase significantly because what was traditionally used for commuter parking won't be an option anymore, and that's going to be, where the Dayton site is, and Ken Smith currently. So I think we need to have a bigger discussion regarding this for another time.
We can do that, however, we can't sell the permits then January 1st. People are going to have to.
Oh, no, I get
pay
it.
by
We have a
coin.
short shot clock, yeah, but we need to.
I mean, that's up to you. If you want to tell them all you can do is pay by Park Mobile or coin, we can certainly do that. But I think people are used to having the permits and but whatever the council decides.
No, it's not that the permits will go away. My point is, we need to also start kind of thinking about what's going to happen because the demand is going to be a lot greater, I think, come January 1st.
Right.
But we're going to have a lot less inventory.
Well, we
of
do
spots to
have,
sell.
but we have inventory of spaces in Cottage and Walnut where people can park.
Right.
So the 750 ones, we didn't limit, and, they didn't sell out. So there were still empty spaces. So they exist. What I'm just trying to figure out is if we need to do a new ordinance for new pricing. And I understand what you're saying about the Walker report, but if we don't put this into effect now, we can't sell the permits as of January. And we actually start selling them in December.
How much time do we have here? Do we have another couple of weeks, or this is just
We would
it?
have to introduce it next week,
Next week?
because it takes 2 months to do an ordinance.
So we'll discuss it next week.
Introduce.
Introduce
Next,
it.
we would have to, if we wanted to increase the rates, we
Right.
would have to introduce the ordinance next week. And then, because then we would adopt in December and still 20 days to take effect. So, I mean, I'm not trying to put you under the gun, and there's no way we would have had the Walker report anyway. And, if I don't know, for 2018, it might be good to leave it as is, because again, if we do build a garage, Hudson won't be in play anymore, and we're gonna have to figure out what to do with those that are displaced, which, will be a whole nother conversation. But, that's why it's my recommendation to leave it as is for 18, see where we go with the garage, see what happens with with Brogan and, Kent Smith not allowing commuters to park there. And then see where we go from there. But again, it's up to you how you wish to proceed.
No, I think we have a choice, and, you know, we can't come up with some arbitrary number, so in the absence of that, we need to maintain them as is, my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think we had a lot of time to think about this, so, yeah.
And as you recall, it was quite a big increase last year.
Yeah.
And so to give another increase in 18, I think might be a hardship for several, so.
I wouldn't want to do that.
And I mean, I'm comfortable leaving it like this, but I just had a couple of questions.
Sure.
Did we maintain a list, like an email list of those folks that purchased the parking passes last year? That we can communicate, like, that they're available?
Offhand, I don't remember if we have email on the application. If we do, we can certainly create a email blast. We can also, though, do things like go to the train station and hand out flyers. We can, explain to people what, that's going to remain the same, handouts saying this is what the situation is, this is where you can purchase them. We usually start selling them approximately the third week in December. We can make people aware of that also. And it's usually a good time for people because some people take off around the holidays, or they might have modified work schedules where they can come in. And again, they themselves, if they're the commuter, don't have to come in as long as a spouse or a friend or a neighbor is willing to come in for them and has the necessary documentation, the license and registration, then we can, go ahead and issue it to them, so.
Okay. Anything else on that part? Next.
So we're okay. Okay, so the meter rates are right now these can be changed at any time. So, all I'm saying is what they are currently. Again, with the Walker report, if they say we need to increase meter rates, we can certainly do that mid-year or whenever we decide to do that. It's really the parking permits because we sell them starting in December. So right now, all our streets are 50 cents an hour. All the lots except Cottage Place are 50 cents an hour. And Cottage Place is 50 cents an hour except for the CBD employee spaces, which are 25 cents an hour. So I just wanted to know at this time if you wanted to modify any of those. Okay. I think we should really wait for the Walker report to see what they say.
Right.
Meter times, all lots except the Cottage Place lot, the train station lot, and park and ride lot are 3 hours. The Cottage Place does have 8-hour meters. The train station lot has 12-hour meters, as does the park and ride lot. In addition, Walnut Street lot for the CBD employees has 8-hour meters as well. Do you want all those to remain the same? Okay. The next one is the CBD employee stickers. CBD parking stickers required, which is $20. That's annual. And then in addition, they can either pay by coin or by Park Mobile. They can purchase hang tags, which are $80 per month, or $40 if they buy them mid-month. Do you wish to modify any of those? They've actually been very well purchased. There are a lot of people who do purchase them. There are a lot of companies who do purchase them for their employees. Some employees purchase them on their own. But it does give them an opportunity to park, in a spot designated for them, and which is off the street, which helps the customers to be able to park on the street if they wish to do so.
How many of the $20 stickers did we sell?
If you want, I can look it up on my phone.
No,
I don't have it with me. I don't have. I will give it to you.
I'm guessing it's above 70, 80.
Yeah, I forget. For an annual sticker, I do forget. I will give that to all of you, though.
Okay, all right, good, thanks.
Then the other thing is that we had parking spaces specifically for Shoppers Diners, Hudson, Chestnut, and Prospect, all at 3-hour meters. Do you want to retain those as is? Okay. So the other thing we did allow is that the vehicles with the commuter hang tags, the RPPs could not park in the Shopper Diners during the week, but on Saturday, they could use them anywhere. Okay, and everyone's okay with that?
The only concern I have is that I'm still seeing a lot of the Cottage Place employee spaces remain empty. And so I think that maybe we have to think about playing with that number again.
Okay.
Because it's almost, people drive by and they want to park and shop and they can't, and they're it doesn't it's not great to have all the spaces empty.
Okay, so we could certainly do some field surveys and see how many we see empty. This is probably a good time too, because they probably have the most employees at this time.
Right.
They may have additional personnel for the holidays, so we'll do some field work and just see and come back with a recommendation. And I agree, because I know we've had some frustrated people who have not been able to find a spot, and yet there are many CBD employee spots empty.
And they're just looking at these empty spaces, and they know they could be ticketed if they park there, and they're
Correct.
driving around looking for space, so, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So I thank you for that input, so we can move forward. The next one is under budget. This authorizes the tax collector to turn over a premium paid on a tax title lien to the treasurer. At a tax sale, the unpaid prior municipal liens are sold. In addition, potential lien holders bid on the interest rate they are willing to accept at redemption. There was a tax title lien number 12-000007 sold to a third party on 10/17/2012. It's a premium paid in the amount of $26,000. State statute indicates that if redemption is not made within 5 years from the date of sale, the premium payment shall be turned over to the treasurer. So this remits $26,000 to the general fund of the village.
Questions, comments? Nope.
The next one is a annual resolution. Actually, let me go through the next three. They're annual resolutions for the interest rate for delinquent taxes, interest rate for non-payment of other municipal liens, and interest rate for significant sewer dischargers. All of them have the 8% per annum on the first $1,500 of taxes becoming delinquent after the due date, and 18% on any amount of taxes in excess of $1,500, or in excess of the municipal lien, or in excess of the significant sewer discharge payment. For the taxes, it's a 10-day grace period, which I think all of us know, and it's a 6% per annum penalty, anything in excess of $10,000 for the taxes. It's the same for the municipal liens, but the due date is 25 days from the date of council certification of costs. And then the final one for the assessments is, again, they have a 30-day grace period for all bills. So basically, they're all the same for different things for charging interest, and this is for the year 2018.
Questions or anything?
Okay, the next one is the Child Health Conference. This is an annual resolution for a shared services agreement with the boroughs of Fair Lawn and Glen Rock. This public health practice standards requires municipalities to provide child health conferences for comprehensive preventive health care of infants and children up to age 18. We bill Glen Rock and Fair Lawn for 1/3 of the invoice billed by the pediatrician. We've had this shared services agreement for over 10 years with Glen Rock, and this will be the second full year with Fair Lawn.
Okay.
Okay, the next one is for the Child Health Conference pediatrician. We did go out for 8 quotes from pediatricians. We received 1 reply from Dr. Naruki, who has actually done this for the past 9 years. His requested rate is $170 per hour. This is no increase from 2017. Maximum amount for each town paid will be $1,900. They run approximately 2 hours per month and are held 11 months out of the year.
Questions, anyone? Moving on.
The next one is another annual one for Valley Community Health. This is for the community service programs. It includes nursing services for communicable disease investigations, child health clinics, adult health clinics, school audits, and flu clinics. The cost of the village is $11,620.28. This is no increase from 2017. They bill for the hours used, and in average over the past few years, it's been about $10,000. They also provide health education services. This includes the annual weight loss challenge and the wellness festival, and they provide those at no charge to the village.
Great, questions? Moving on.
The next one is software support contracts with Edmunds and Associates. This is annually done. They actually, this memo, when it was written, indicated that the pay-to-play have not yet been filed. They actually have been filed since the date of this memo. The 2018 contract amount is $19,989 plus $350 for estimated tax billing, which we normally do, plus $1,200 for online lookup. This is again, zero increase from 2017. It applies to the following applications: tax collection, financial accounting, payroll, escrow accounting, human resources, and accounts receivable.
Questions?
The next one is awarding a contract for recycling of vegetative waste. This is for the remainder of the vegetative waste from the yard waste season. We have obtained quotes from 2 vendors. The low quote is from B&B Organic Waste. It's $7 per cubic yard, and so that's a recommendation.
Okay. No questions?
The next one is for refurbishing a leach body for the sanitation vehicle. Sanitation Division has budgeted funds in the capital account for a refurbished leach body from a recently replaced sanitation truck. The body will be mounted to one of the newly purchased chassis to be used in the daily collection of solid waste. The new body is approximately $60,000. If it were new, the refurbished one is $32,028.
Okay.
So it's quite a savings.
Okay, moving on.
Okay, the next one is, we've budgeted funds in the street division for a crew cab chassis, a dump body, a spreader, hydraulics, and a snow plow. This is actually being awarded to two vendors. One is National Auto Fleet Group, who will provide a 2018 Ford diesel crew cab and chassis at a cost of $61,407. Trias Inc. will provide the steel dump body, V-box spreader, and hydraulic system for $52,864. And then the Western 10-foot snow plow, also provided by Trias Inc., which is $7,412. The total cost is $121,683. It's being purchased through a cooperative purchasing contract, and there is money in the 2017 capital budget for this.
Okay. Any questions?
The next one is award of a contract for a Bobcat. It's through the street division. It's actually going to have various uses. It will be utilized for snow removal operation. It has a snow blower attachment, which will assist in the removal of snow in the central business district. It has a backhoe attachment for digging trenches, and is also equipped with forks, which allows for the moving of construction materials. We received a quote not to exceed $75,697 from Bobcat of New Jersey, and this is through the Bergen County Cooperative Purchasing System. And again, this was budgeted for in the capital budget.
Wait, this is going to be used again for snow removal
And then also digging trenches in the non-snow weather, as well as forks. So if we have to move construction materials or materials, they have forklifts as well.
Do they see it being used a lot? I mean, it sounds like it wouldn't be used a lot. I mean, snow.
I think it'll be used a lot because it can get into various smaller spaces with snow. It can, and again, it says it has a snow blower attachment.
Right.
The backhoe for digging trenches, certainly we have to dig trenches often in the village.
Okay.
I think it will be used a lot, actually.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, the next one is the crane safety ordinance.
Heather, did you miss the snow
Did I miss one?
plows?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Which one?
11C12.
Oh, okay,
The snow plows,
sorry.
yeah, that's okay.
It's stuck. It's stuck to the other one. The snow plows are, again, Village's Street Division and Sanitation Division, 2 front-end loaders and 2 sanitation trucks. They're going to be utilized in snow removal, which will be interesting because it'll be the first time we're using sanitation trucks for snow plowing, which they do in New York City, I know. So the quote is from Trias Inc., New Jersey Cooperative Purchasing System, not to exceed $65,268. And again, this was budgeted for in the capital budget.
I just have a stupid question. The two snowplow models, one is much higher, it's higher than the other, it's about
One is
60.
for the sanitation trucks and the
Yeah,
other is for
is there,
loaders.
yeah, okay, so there's I guess a modification you need to make to the plow, then,
Correct, for the
Okay.
two different vehicles.
okay.
Okay. Now I can go back to crane safety ordinance. Sorry about skipping that one. So we're bringing this to you. I know Mayor Knutson wanted to bring this to you because obviously we're going to have use of cranes, I'm sure, with our new multifamily housing. So I'll have you speak to it.
Great, thank you. So during our planning board meeting, Councilman Voigt, I believe, asked some questions about rooftop units and how those units would be placed. I think there was some conversation that heavy units would be going up elevators or staircases, and then there was some discussion about crane use. And so I had recalled that quite some time ago, we raised this issue about a crane safety ordinance, and I thought maybe it was time to bring it back and have a conversation about it, because some of these buildings will be 50 some odd feet high, and there'll be a lot of rooftop mechanicals being installed, and we certainly want to do everything we can to protect the area. So I didn't, we can change this. I see that one of them I pulled up was West New York evidently adopted this one that was sent to us specifically pertaining to the crane safety ordinance. It appears they adopted it. It's a very different environment. We can modify it any way we feel necessary. That's more appropriate for Ridgewood, but just for everyone's kind of feedback on it.
So currently, we have no ordinance addressing safety, okay.
We don't have anything at the present time.
Yeah, we need one.
Yeah, there's gonna be
We need one.
Yeah.
a lot of cranes downtown.
Yeah, and I know, so just for feedback as to what we, if we have any added input, I don't know if our village engineer, I know he and I had a conversation, I think, probably a year ago about this, and I don't know if he had any additional feedback, if he wants to speak to it, or,
And basically what this does, it requires a permit. They have to renew it every 30 days. There is a fee, a higher fee for the first permit, and then the additional permits are a little lower. But it requires them to be licensed. It requires certain training that they have, which is all wonderful for safety purposes.
sure, certification that drug testing has
Correct.
been
Yes,
procured,
right.
okay.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and Council again. The issue with the crane ordinance that you should consider is what level of crane and what type of lifting apparatus you wish to include in it. Cranes are used frequently in the village for tree removal. We rent cranes all the time for the trees we have to deal with, as do many homeowners for the larger cranes in their properties, simply because it lessens the chance of damage. It makes it easier to remove, say, a large tree from the backyard. Tree companies, question would be for the council, would you want them included? Would you want a piece of construction equipment called a lull, like a giant forklift? Would you like something like that to be included, where you have a machine that has an arm, or raising arm, elevating arm that telescopes out, often used to bring like roof shingles to a higher elevation for a roofing job? Would you like to include something like that? It can get very comprehensive, but that's where, in the preparation of this ordinance, the thoughts of the council are key and critical.
That's probably where we left off a year ago. Okay, so they're great questions, because I think a lot of people do use them for tree removal purposes, but in this application, I think we're talking about a more densely populated trafficked area, vehicular traffic, pedestrian traffic, and I'm sure that in the operation of a crane, that would have police enforcement and road blockage, but, we put it out there for everyone else what their thoughts are.
So, Chris, what happens with the tree services that have the cranes? They're indemnified themselves, and so they...
Well, one would hope they have insurance, and the reason I say that is, before I became an engineer, I did work as an arborist. I did do a lot of crane work. We occasionally had cranes that flipped over. It's not pretty. It makes a mess. So anybody who hires a tree service to do a crane job, it would behoove them to make sure they present a certificate of insurance, certainly indemnifying them and covering the homeowner for the services that they're contracting for.
Yeah.
Most of the industry now is much more above board than it has been in the past. Cranes are getting larger, they're more expensive, but again, those are things that have to be considered.
Yeah.
Is there, oh, I'm sorry, Ray.
I have no idea as to the size of the crane, and, I mean, I'm gonna,
Well, there's
gonna
another,
use your expertise.
there's another example. If say you're building a house, and you're sheetrocking a second floor, there are trucks with articulated booms that will lift up the sheetrock, deliver it to an open window on the second floor, making it much easier for any contractor doing the work, because they don't have to carry it up the stairs, or their staff doesn't have to do that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Has there been any issues with cranes in the village, to your knowledge, of safety issues or any kind of concerns where we might have to include smaller contractors or tree removal services?
Not to my knowledge. For example, this summer the high school did some HVAC units. They notified the police department, they notified us when they wanted the work. We let Heather know as the village manager, because they wanted to get in a little early start so they would be done. And as far as I recall, the operation went smoothly with no upsets. I know the library has to do some HVAC work. They're scheduling it for a holiday, again, to be the least impact to their patrons. How do we go about setting the appropriate level of insurance? Because obviously, if you're doing a large construction on a $2 million home versus delivering sheetrock to, how do we set that? I would do the most easiest thing possible. I would talk to our insurance broker, Connor Strong, I believe. They've always given us good guidance on insurance limits for various contracts and actions that the village participates in. I'd certainly reach out to them and say, what levels of insurance do you recommend? Is there any specific language they would recommend that we see in the certificate of insurance a contractor presents?
And I guess the only other thing, in terms of indemnification, it would be both the developer and the crane operator that we would require.
Yes, and I think the village of Ridgewood should be included as additionally insured if any of that crane operation is done from within the public right-of-way. That, I would think, is absolutely a necessity to indemnify us.
So I guess my thoughts would be that since there isn't currently any kind of issues or problems with tree removal or smaller residential construction, that we just, for ease of writing the ordinance, limit it to major construction, larger construction in the CBD, and go that way, unless anybody has any other thoughts.
I was actually just going to ask Matt, how would you write that type of language?
The first thing I would do is see if we can identify, as Chris had pointed out earlier, see how we would identify the different types of cranes and the ones that don't fit into the average landscapers or tree removal person, and then deal with those. And, I think you've identified all the issues, which is the indemnification aspect of it, the insurance coverage, naming the town as naming the village as an additional insured, and going about it that way. So.
Okay. So I guess we can just do some more work on this and then maybe bring it back.
Maybe we could bring a draft to you for December.
Right. Okay.
Because that'll be our next work session.
I think that maybe if something could be fleshed out, presented to you folks, and then you could decide how it sat with you, if it met the goals you want to achieve in protecting our population.
Okay.
Right, just because, next week, I don't think we would have it in time for that work session.
No, and it's fine. We have
Okay.
a window of opportunity.
Sure.
We have time. I just think
Sure.
that it's something we should start
Okay,
thinking about now
sure.
and getting it wrapped up.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next item is fundraising information on the village website.
That's mine again. So, at the last CRAB meeting, a discussion came up regarding an entity that's a nonprofit 501c3, and they wanted to do a fundraising event, and it's a spectacular, wonderful, lovely event. But they came to the CRAB meeting and looking for how to promote it through the Community Relations Advisory Board, and there was a suggestion that it could be promoted on the village website and the library website. And so I didn't want to rain on anyone's parade because I think it's a fabulous fundraiser, but I thought that it was wise to first bring it to the village attorney to see if it's even legal or, wise to do that. And at his suggestion, he said, well, bring it to the council as a policy discussion and see where we would want to go with it, because it could potentially open up a different can of worms using our village website and the library website. So when I said I would have to check to see the appropriateness of it with our council, the library representative said, well, obviously that would apply to us as well, and of course it would. So I just put it out there for discussion as to what anyone thinks about allowing any nonprofit and how we, if we choose to move forward with that, or to say that we don't want to be involved in that because everybody would then want access, and there's an administrative issue as well. So just in terms of a policy discussion, it's out there.
I mean, that was my discussion with the mayor, and my feeling as well is just that if we start taking positions with regard to assisting fundraising for nonprofits, for non-Ridgewood, non-village entities, how do you say no? What's the criteria? In certain other aspects. I mean, we're allowed to put certain things on our website. It's just a matter of the representation or the perception of promoting particular events, and how do you say no to one, yes to another? And my recommendation is that it wouldn't be a good idea to open that door. But certainly from a policy standpoint, it's up to the council.
I mean, they have other vehicles to use from a social media / promotional standpoint, so, I'm not sure how much more they're gonna get out of putting it on the village website, to be honest with you.
That's right.
So,
I think less people look at the village website than they do everything else. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have a greater opportunity on social media, certainly.
yeah,
So the point is...
But the point was, the question was, it was raised, and so it was just wise to bring it back here, or to bring it to, just to see where we're at with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also part of a larger discussion that we've been having in terms of, the things that we put on our websites, and are they endorsed by us as a village? Because some of the things we may have no control over, so it may be something that appears innocent, let's say, and then if they link it to a website, you go on the website and there's something on there that may be offensive to somebody, did the village then endorse something that was offensive? So I think that's the challenge for us, although well-meaning, and thinking that if any 501c3 is going to have only appropriate stuff on it, we have no control over what they put. So I don't feel that in some of the instances, there's a lot of things that, are endorsed by us, certainly, but, what's the cautionary tale of the internet? And like they say, once it's up there, it's up there. So.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say it's a can of worms I wouldn't be interested in opening.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, the optics sometimes are a bit tricky. I'm trying to come up if there's any other way that we can, or again, to your point, if we direct somebody to an external website, how do we control what that is? And do we want to get into the issue of regulating what, I think it's extra work, and it's not the platform for it.
Yeah, I actually think it's just from an administrative perspective, that's added layers of work, and we, struggle, I guess, not struggle to keep our website up to date, but that's a job unto itself, so anything we add is just more work and becomes a greater challenge. So I think so as a policy, we would want to say that we're not going to advance that. And, okay. All right.
The next item is police vehicle leasing maintenance program. This is under policy only for the fact that prior to 3 years ago, we bought vehicles. We leased 5 administrative and detective cars from Enterprise and for our police department, and it's worked out very well. It has saved us over $140,000 in costs over the last 3 years. We enter into an equity lease where the end of the term, we turn the cars back to Enterprise. The cars are then sold in open auction, and we get a large percentage of the profits. We're expecting that we'll get about $2,000 a car net overall from that auction. A second part of the program is a service agreement. We pay for service about 80% of the estimated allocated budgeting by Fleet Services for a car they usually service. We've also been able to extend the service to the Tahoes in the police department, and again, great results in return on our investment. So this is whether the council would like to continue to use this policy and lease vehicles as opposed to buying them. I would certainly recommend it. We've had a great experience doing this.
Any questions? Thoughts? Okay, keep going.
So the next one is zoning in the Central Business District. Again, Mayor Newton had sent this in concerning our B1 and B2 zoning, and I'll let her take it from here.
Yeah. So I did receive a letter, and I don't want to get into the specifics of that, pertaining to a store, Mainstay, that's going to be closing before their lease terminates. And the concern of the property owner regarding the limitations and restrictions on the types of businesses that are can operate at the B1 or B2 zone, so the B1 being along Main Ridgewood Avenue and the B2 being like the Oak Street, Chestnuts, etc. And so recently another business is also being displaced as a result of some of the development projects and looking for a new home. That particular business is also finding it difficult to find a place and a home in the Central Business District just based on these restrictions. And I started to really study this because I heard so much feedback from our business district that I thought it was probably time to maybe speak to our village planner and make a determination as to whether or not we want to look at more internet-proof types of businesses, whether it's be by, service industries and maybe by percentage of, what's available on each block, or if there's a way to approach it that strikes a good balance, but allows us to have a little bit more flexibility and open up to businesses that typically would not be found on the first floor, ground floor of, the B1 or B2 district. So it also goes to the, I guess I'll just combine the two. The OB2 district, which is along the, I want to get this right, on the southbound side of the Route 17 corridor. If you're, where we have currently, there's some Valley office buildings. Is it Leva, Dr. Leva the eye care, the Shell station. So that too it's primarily now a mixed commercial office business use, and it's really not reflective of the trending, what's trending there. And at the time, I think when we were doing our master plan reexamination, we started to look at that, and then we kind of backed off of it, but said we would leave it for a later date. So I'm putting it out there as to whether or not I think our planner, Bridget, did she say she's available next week to come? So she would come and just at least talk to us, and we can make a determination, and Matt can speak to this, just so I don't get lost in the weeds of process. Because I believe that we could modify the zoning ourselves in some areas, or we could send it back to the planning board. So can you speak to that a little?
I mean, the process can initiate, can start here,
Right.
go there, but one way or the other, whatever gets done has to be reviewed by the planning board.
Right.
So if we were to take it on yourselves and take Bridget's presentation, try and formulate that into an ordinance, you would take that and then send it back over to the planning board. You could, off the bat, just say, Bridget, why don't we take this to the planning board, let the planning board consider it, and let them start the process. So you could do it either way.
So what we would do, when Bridget is here next week, we can have everyone supplied with the current B1, B2, and OB2 zones, and actually all of the zones, but you'll better understand the kind of restrictions that we currently have, and you'll kind of see where second floor, certain types of businesses are appropriate on the second floor, and yet they do generate significant pedestrian traffic. So why don't we pull all of that for next week? We'll have everyone have B1, B2. We have our maps. We can supply with the maps in the OB2 zone. Let Bridget kind of give us her feedback and guidance, and I just put it out there if everyone is interested in pursuing this and starting to take a look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think our zoning is in desperate need of updating. I think if you look at some of the uses, I think it includes haberdasheries. It really is very outdated. And it's sort of, when we look at the empty storefronts we have today, you almost can't fault the type of business for closing, but the reality is that if we don't fill them, we're not filling them because there's interest in those empty storefronts, but the use is not permitted. So it's not really reflective of what the actual demand is for commercial space today. So I agree, if we can do anything to kind of speed up that process and give the flexibility to be able to allow some businesses in there, I think it'll be a great service to the Central Business District.
And I attached the article that, and this is for Westchester officials battle vacant downtown storefronts, and it really kind of lays out this whole scenario with what's trending and how they have to kind of insulate against that kind of that big, giant internet and the mall. So if everybody's good, she can be here next week and can move us.
Just a simple question for Matt. I think I have to recuse myself because I'm within 200 feet of that site.
You may.
Yeah. And
I think we ought to take a look and just see if you are within 200 feet of the OB zone.
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the map here, and I'm pretty sure I'm within 200 feet.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it might be.
We'll have to find
I'm
out.
going
We'll
to take measure out next
We
week.
can ask the assessors, we can ask the assessor's office and find out if you are.
Well, is that something, if let's just say we were modifying the zoning on that, if we were starting that here, let's just say hypothetically, we were adding a type of use, say we wanted to add one use to that, is that something you have to notice on, a 200-foot, if you're just changing, I mean?
No, but it's
okay.
it's got nothing to do with the notice, it's
Right, no,
got
got
everything
it.
to do with the conflict.
Okay, good. Okay, all right, so good, we'll have her here next week, perfect. All right, moving on to the manager's report.
Okay, I just want to remind everyone the general election is November 7th. Polls will be open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. The governor's office, as well as our local assembly and Senate representatives, will be decided in this election. I want to remind everyone the yellow postcards with the 2017 leaf placement schedule have been mailed to every household. If you did not receive the yellow postcard, which we found several people have not, please contact the village manager's office and we will get you a copy of it, or go onto our website, click on leaf season, which are the falling leaves on the right-hand side in the box, and that will show you when you get picked up. It's based on your yard waste area, areas A through D. We had a bit of a glitch with our leaf. You would click on leaf and it wouldn't give you the dates. As of tomorrow, that should all be resolved, so when you do click on leaves, it will tell you what your dates of placement are. Again, remember, the postcard and the information is when you can place your leaves. The crews come after that and pick them up. October Fest is during the month of October. Walks and tours of a wide variety of topics and locations have been offered, including village buildings, schools, nonprofits, food walks, dessert and pizza, jewelry shopping, a haunted Ridgewood one, which I understand they're going to have a repeat of this week, which is pretty interesting. And so you sign up for the tours at ridgewoodwalks.com. This will go through the end of October. The Central Valet service will, fingers crossed, begin this Friday, October 27th, and will continue every Friday and Saturday night from 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. until the end of the year. So it's basically December 30th is the last Saturday. It is $5 per vehicle. We will have technology in place so that we can accept credit, debit. Obviously, they will also accept cash. Once it's up and running, we will offer to our merchants to be able to validate the cost, and so they may pick up in some of our merchants. We will have papers for our Central Valet personnel to hand out, or if people ask, we can certainly have them available here in Village Hall and on the website as well as to which merchants will validate. These may change from week to week. It may take an extra week to get someone up and running because it takes about 7 to 10 days, apparently, is what we're being told by our valet company, to get merchants, once they decide to validate, to get that. So in the meantime, that's up to the merchant if they want to deduct it from the bill or however they want to work it. Chamber of Commerce Haunted Harvest, this Saturday, October 28th, from 1 to 4 p.m. at Memorial Park at Van Ness Square. You can walk through the haunted graveyard, hide in the hay maze, jump through the pumpkin patch, dress in your favorite costume, and march in the Halloween parade and contest. I wanted to mention that the staff met with Millennium Strategies, who is our grant writing firm. They were able to get to know our department directors and supervisors. We gave them some of the areas we wanted them to look for grants for us. I think something that I'm very proud of is that they said they enjoyed meeting with all our staff, and the biggest feedback that they got from at least 90% of the people and departments they met with were that departments wanted to do public outreach so that our residents are well informed, so that we can let them know what we're doing, and we want to assist our residents as much as we can and give them as much information as possible. Halloween is next Tuesday, October 31st. When you are out trick-or-treating, please stay in groups, stay with adults, and always have a flashlight so that you can be seen by others. There are several projects going on in the village, from paving streets, which are still going on, to work being done by PSE&G as part of their Energy Strong program, to Ridgewood Waters placing new water mains at stream crossings. One of particular note, which is going to begin actually tomorrow, is Van Emberg Avenue. It'll be closed from Hampshire Road to Washington Township. The road will close at 8 a.m. on most of the day from October 26th through December 1st. There will be detours for these projects, and police officers will be available to assist motorists to and from their homes in this area. Residents in the area of Van Emberg Avenue and its side streets should continue to place their leaves in the street during their designated leaf placement dates. Village crews will continue to pick up leaves after the leaf placement dates, as is being done throughout the village. There will be no disruption. Our police officers will make sure that they can get in to remove the leaves. The estate card, again, I just want to mention that it's available. It offers property tax savings, and by purchasing locally as well as online, it'll generate rewards, which will then reduce Ridgewood property taxes, and an even greater level of reward is offered perhaps during certain time periods, and that you can all find on the estate cards website. So you visit ridgewoodestatecard.com to learn more about this. And finally, I just want to mention the farmers market will extend their operation through November 19th. That's Sundays from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Ridgewood train station parking lot.
Great, thank you. Councilman Voigt?
Thank you. On Monday evening, there was a debate for the 40th District Assembly state candidates. Actually took place in the courtroom here. It was Dutch, Ordway, and Paul Vagianos from the Village on the Democratic side, Corrado, DePhillips, and Rooney on the Republican side. Very spirited debate. The people who attended, I think, were rather entertained. The issues that were discussed were the 2% budget cap for municipalities, building a new tunnel underneath the Hudson River, healthcare at the state level, cleanup funds for use of contamination, improving the state debt rating, bringing new jobs to towns, affordable housing. I just wanted to thank the League of Women Voters for putting this together. They did a really nice job. The Library Board of Trustees meeting was last night. They would like to encourage all voters to vote for the New Jersey Library Construction Bond Act, which is a $125 million bill or bond for state libraries, with the potential for Ridgewood Library to access some of these funds through the grant process for needed renovations. Mark your calendars for April 25th, 2018, Friends of Library Author Luncheon and Fundraiser is taking place. They've identified a author, but it's still top secret. The Ridgewood Library Foundation is having a fundraiser as well on June 16th, 2018 at the Ridgewood Country Club. They just finished a library survey, and the results are still being tabulated, but the early findings are as follows. There's not enough open space for studying and meetings in the library. There's a need for the auditorium to be upgraded with improved seating. The residents would like longer hours on Sunday, and there is some opportunity to better market some of the premium databases the library actually has for use remotely, which they happen to buy and which are rather expensive for anybody else to buy individually. So you should take advantage of that, the residents. The library wants to mention that they're grateful for Chris Rudishauser for his help in the evaluation of the roof load bearing capacity for the HVAC units that are going to be put up on the roof. Open space meeting is next Monday, October 30th, and the planning board meeting is the next meeting is November 7th, 2017. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. Just very briefly, tomorrow at 5 p.m. down in the garden room, the Senior Center Advisory Board will be meeting. And on Tuesday at 8 o'clock, also in the garden room, this past Tuesday, yesterday, the Green Team met. And in reviewing our certification, I know I announced last time that Ridgewood has been certified at a silver level through the state program Sustainable Jersey. According to the website, there are only 47 towns that are certified at this level out of the 565 municipalities in all of New Jersey. So kudos to Jiffy Vermillion, our chair, and it's a really great accomplishment. And in reviewing some of the actions that we got credit for, Ridgewood deserves a big round of applause, or that a boy or that a girl or whatever, because 40% of the energy that the town uses comes from renewable sources. So in our application, we got 40 points due to the amount of energy that comes in through renewable sources, and that's various programs that have been going on for years, a lot through the engineering department. So a big thank you for that, and let's keep going. Thank you.
At a village.
At a village, even better.
Councilwoman Walsh.
Okay, so just first, the League of Municipalities meeting is going to be the week of November 14th, 14th, 15th. Many of the council members, as well as staff, will be in attendance. It's an annual conference that is educational and is great for members of the village councils throughout the state, all the municipalities, to show up, meet each other, talk about different things, go in different classes, talk about issues that we have learned from others, how they've tackled issues. So it's a great conference, and I know that many of us will be attending that week, and we'll learn a bunch of stuff and bring it back to the village. Citizen safety, we had our citizen safety meeting last week. It was a really very active meeting, once again, and I'm just going to do some of the highlights because we did talk about a lot of stuff. They are working on Hillcrest. We've got all kinds of stuff going on Glen, actually, near Hillcrest in terms of paving. There were some conversations regarding whether or not there are going to be, at some point, sidewalks put in on Glen. There was also discussion about crossing over Glen for some of the people that actually do walk their kids up to the school. Believe it or not, they walk all the way up to Willard, and how they get across that street. The conversation then went into the signage that we have over here on by Graydon, where we have the illuminated signs, and I wish Chris was still here to ask the proper terminology, but they were wondering if that would be something that the council would consider with putting that on there so people can slow down coming down that hill. We all know that it's 25 miles per hour, but if you've ever been there trying to pull out of Hillcrest or pull out of Upper when cars are coming down, they certainly seem like they're going a lot faster. The focus has been on the areas surrounding schools, so there's been work by the Ridge School, which we talked about 2 meetings ago, and the extra crossing guard that's up there, the changes to Clinton Avenue with the now opened street after the start and before the end of school. There was discussion about Franklin Avenue. We had talked about Franklin Avenue in the last month's meeting. We talked about it again, and the TAP grant. There needed to be some clarification from the Department of Transit if they want to break down into sub-projects and give awards for sub-projects, or can the money be used as we see fit for grant applications, as the grant application as awarded. So again, Chris is working on that with them to make sure that we are staying within what we're legally allowed to do. The engineer did tell the group he has not signed off on any plans whatsoever on Franklin Avenue, even though there have been discussions about some upgrades there. Ridge School, the drop-off map, they're working internally to try and get that done so they can disseminate that to members of the public. They're currently, the red zone chairs don't have that completed, so that, again, that's something that they're working on internally. The crosswalk, Van Emberg and Hampshire, is okay with, that they're doing the work there this week. That's unrelated, but we need to put the ADA ramp in first before we can do the work to get the crosswalk in, because it's a county road, and although they're going to allow us to make the changes, we have to follow and do exactly what is required. Let's see what else. CBDAC, we talked about Central Valet. CSAC's concerned about the safety of pedestrians. After it was discussed, we had an update from the CSAC liaison to CBDAC, and the location where the valet drivers are going to have to be going back and forth. They're worried that we are going to have a challenge not in the beginning of the evening, the end of the evening, when they have to go back and forth to get the cars and bring them back to the waiting individuals, that is going to create perhaps a safety hazard because it's going to be dark, and safety hazard for pedestrians. So our member of the Ridgewood Police Department was not able to make the meeting this month, so those questions have been posed, I believe, to him. Railroad parking lot, CSAC is concerned that they haven't seen final schematics, and I said, we don't have final schematics, so that's why they haven't seen them, but they would like the chance to review them before the council votes. Chris Rudishauser did tell us that the arborist is reviewing the trees, and I don't know if that's something that REAC is involved in or not. The arborist is reviewing the trees that are there to determine their status. Let's see what else. And then the Gateway neighborhood came in mass and brought a petition with them regarding some traffic and speeding that they're having, wrong-way drivers, delivery drivers causing trouble, and some other overweight vehicles coming through. We did have an empty police car that was placed there for some traffic calming, but they feel that not enough is being done there and would like us to further discuss it. So, an engineer is currently taking a look at the Cantrell Bel Air
That issue,
loop.
right, that
Yeah,
was concerned,
loop. Yeah.
right, got it.
And then we just remind everybody that it is getting darker, and if you're out there, you should be wearing visible clothing, and make sure that people can see you as you cross or get out of your cars and walk around. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think on that Cantrell, just real quick, I think that was a yield sign that's there presently, and we were switching those to stop anyway, because the
Yeah.
yield is like kind of a suggestion.
Yep.
Okay, all right, great.
That's all I have.
Okay, Councilman Hache.
All right, CBDAC, we only hire slow drivers, so you're going to be okay. Last Saturday night, my family and I had the honor and pleasure of attending at the RHS Campus Center, the Diwali celebration hosted by the Ridgewood Indian community. For those of you not familiar, Diwali is the Hindu festival of lights and spiritually signifies the victory of light over darkness. We had a great time, lots of music, lots of great food. I'd like to thank personally Saurav Dani and Adidat Singh for the invitation and for graciously hosting us. We had a great time. CBDAC, one of the main items that we discussed last week, it was a pretty packed agenda, but one of the things that we wanted to discuss was sort of, moving forward taking advantage of the fact that we have a very good cross-section of the community within the committee. We have residents, we have business owners, property owners, and then we have participation from village council, chief of police, engineering, and we feel that we really have a very good mix of folks, and we're going to start coordinating with the mayor to come up with a series of business community forums that we're hoping to have use of this room to bring in the business community. We feel that we've had some lapses in communication, some of the things that we're working on, the initiatives, that information is not filtering well into some of the businesses. It could mean that the traditional channels that we've used have changed somewhat over the years. If you look at the Chamber of Commerce today, most of the composition of the board and even of the membership is professional services, not necessarily merchants. So some of the things that we're doing have a much bigger impact on merchants and retailers. So we just want to invite them in, talk to them, listen to what are their concerns, what are the challenges they're facing. I know that we get a lot of feedback sort of piecemeal from different places. One is some of the ordinances that we have in town, whether or not they're relevant today than when they were written, many years ago. Maybe it could be zoning issues, but also it gives an opportunity to discuss and communicate to the business community a lot of the initiatives that we've undertaken. What are the challenges that we faced in trying to implement some of these initiatives and where we can use their help, and really begin that two-way dialogue, open that up. We're hoping to be able to do that maybe quarterly or as needed, but that's something that we're going to start rolling out fairly soon. Oktoberfest has been a great initiative. This is something that was brought to us by Jeannie Johnson. It's been wonderful. I've had the pleasure of hosting 2 of the historic downtown tours, and it's always nice because we end up somewhere really good to eat. So we ended up at the Daily Treat on the first week, and then Kilwin's last week. Jeannie hasn't told me where I'm going to be eating next, But I have my next tour on Friday, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. We meet right in front of the post office in the corner. Do you know where we're eating? Where's that? Ridgewood Coffee House, there you go. So they're really fun. You know, the feedback has been tremendous from the businesses themselves. You know, when we went to the Kilwins tour, you know, the owners were amazed that we have people who've been living in town for a number of years who didn't even know that they were there, they existed. But it's great because you see the camaraderie, you know, even within the groups that as we're walking, people, you know, start connecting with each other. And I happened to run to one of the people who participated in my first tour. She happened to be at the Diwali celebration, and we had a great talk about, you know, the community and so on. So it's a great initiative. I encourage everyone, if you haven't done it yet, there's been so many tours, come to the one that I'm hosting on Friday, 11 a.m. in front of the post office. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I just have a couple of things. I feel like we haven't, like there's this whole time lapse for me that we haven't been here in over a week, but it seems like just yesterday. In any event, so on October 14th, morning of, I had the opportunity to attend Blessing of the Animals at Christ Church. It was absolutely beautiful. The animals were all well behaved, and people do really love their animals. And Christ Church just did a beautiful job with the ceremony. And I just want to thank the Lovings for the invitation. It's a treat. It's absolute treat. Also, the weekend of the October 13th, 14th, and 15th was Access Weekend, and it was hugely successful. And as always, the highlight of Access Weekend is the fashion show, and it did not disappoint. And I wanted to thank Councilman Hache for helping me announce our special needs fashionistas. They definitely were accessorizing, and they did a terrific job up on the runway and doing their twirls and really showing us their stuff. So it was a wonderful, wonderful weekend for everyone. October 15th was the Ridgewood Fire Department open house, and Sparky was there to join in on the fun, and it was really quite a well-attended day with a lot of activities and actually educational opportunities for fire safety. And so we just want to thank the Ridgewood Fire Department, as always, not just the regular fire department and the volunteers, and for everyone that was there to lend a hand. It was absolutely wonderful. Let's see, CRAB. Now, I know that we met, I think Planning Board was the 17th and 18th. Is that? Okay. All right, so CRAB meeting was October 18th, so I actually only got to sit in for a few minutes very early on. So, in terms of the comment that was made earlier, I wasn't there during the time when anything from Board of Ed was discussed, but we're certainly going to look at that in terms of policy discussion as to whether or not that's what should be the discussion that should be happening there. I also attended Diwali, Happy Diwali, and also wanted to thank the Ridgewood Indian community for the invitation, and special thanks to Sudhar Kanwar for loaning me her salwar kameez, which was absolutely beautiful to wear. The fabric was beautiful. It was just magnificent, so I was really thrilled and excited to be wearing that. Walktoberfest, absolutely wonderful, and I actually wanted to thank Jeannie Johnson because I had surgery, knee surgery, less than a month ago, and so we've been trying to kind of regroup, and she's been very patient, making sure that I could actually do the tour of the recycling and fire department, and that has been changed from Sunday to Saturday. I know there's a lot of people signed up, so we're really excited, and I can walk in, so it's all good. So we're moving forward, and that's it. That's all I have. And with that, we are moving back to public comments.
Yeah, Rurik, Holiday 374 Evergreen, with a couple of comments, questions about the garage. Listening to Bob, my question was, gee, it looks like we have a design, because when we start talking about a shortfall or a down payment of $250 versus $500, it looked like the thing had been designed, you know, the decision has been made as to what kind of a garage you're going to have. Reading between the lines, the mayor's comments, it looks like her mind is made up about the Pike design. Listening to Mr. Hache, I see that there's so many questions that are unanswered. So a couple of questions I have is, what is it we know now that we did not know 16 months ago when you came into office? What is it that you studied, that you've looked at, that you now know that you did not know before? And also, this begs the question, the previous administration spent $500,600,000 studying this. What has happened to all that work? Are you so arrogant that you will not even consider or look at some of those studies? This is kind of crazy. Now, also, why is it you do not invite the community to participate in meetings to look at the garage? I mean, the previous administration had meeting after meeting after meeting with invited people to meet with Desmond, with the architect, etc., etc., etc. You don't do that. When will you do that? Don't you think we're owed that? Now, the thing about this garage, which I think we need badly, but the thing about the garage is that I don't understand the economics. I mean, if you're going to talk about 250 spaces, and then you try to make it economical by having a precast building. Now, I remember one of the complaints about the old garage was that it overshadowed the church. Well, a precast building that looks like something out of Newark Airport more than overshadows the church. I mean, it's like a great expression in the Midwest about getting poked in the eye with a sharp stick. I mean, you're taking a sharp stick and you're poking it in the eye of the church. I mean, it's a disgusting design. In spite of all the cute things that the mayor talks about, you know, eyebrow windows and stuff like that. Now, you owe it to the community. You owe it to us, all of us. And this is part of this opaqueness of this administration. There's total lack of transparency compared to other village councils we've had. Invite people, have meetings where you invite people to talk. Let's have Pike again. And not just in a village council meeting, but just have a meeting that Mr. Hache could chair, where you can talk about what we had looked at before. And this idea of just being so tied down to this idea of fitting within the footprint, it could very well be that fitting it within the footprint makes it uneconomical, period. And I'd like to hear someone talk to me about the economics. Before we had the FAC, which has been neutered, at least they did a good job as far as looking over the shoulder of Bob and what have you. So I urge you, now 16 months have gone by since he came into power. We're no closer now than we were before. Now, why don't you invite the public to a couple of meetings where you can meet with Pike, you can meet with Desmond, you can meet with Walker, and not slip this through by not telling people what it is you're doing. I feel very, very upset. Frankly, my comments would have been more pointed if I had not promised my wife to behave myself. But I just shook my head in disgust when I heard the discussion, because you're not showing respect to the people. Thank you.
Good evening, Boyd Loving, 342 South Irving Street. Perhaps I'm a bit misguided, but one of the most important things to me regarding the garage is how much is this going to cost? Again, how much is it going to cost? We've heard 8.5 million. We've heard 11.5 million. Mr. Mooney was here tonight and talked about there being somewhat of a shortfall because of Park Mobile, needing to raise capital. Councilman Hache, excellent points. If you're going to extend parking now until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and I'd like to remind everybody the last time we did that, there was an uproar. There was an absolute uproar when parking was extended until 8 p.m. The restaurant said it drove their business down. But yet we're getting ready to do that again? Are we really going to attempt it again? Councilman Hache hit the nail right on the head. That is nothing more than another tax. We said we want to try to do this without raising tax revenues, but yet you're going to raise parking rates and extend the parking time until 9 o'clock at night. That's another tax. Why are we doing that? We really got to stop and think about, is this all worth it? Are we going to spend millions of dollars, institute another tax to provide more parking, or is there another way to get parking? To me, the garage should be the last resort. All other options need to be explored before we go down this road. Councilman Hache, another excellent point. We're going to be the expensive place for people to go. You can go to Paramus for free. You can go to Glenrock for free. You're going to have to pay to come into Ridgewood. Is it going to drive businesses out of Ridgewood? Is building this garage going to drive businesses out of Ridgewood? It's a real hard decision that you've all got to make, but it's all about the dollars and cents. How much is it going to cost to build it? How much is it going to cost to operate it? And is it going to destroy the community by driving businesses out of town if you do it? Thank you.
Good evening, Saurabh Dani, 390 Bedford Road in Ridgewood. It's late, I'll take 10 seconds. When you were discussing about the Glenwood and Hillcrest Road and 25-mile-an-hour limit, I just remember I started going to a new workplace these days in Roseland, and what they have there, at least on 2 streets, is the similar radar-enforced speed signs that we have on Ridgewood Avenue and near the schools that show you your current speed. But as soon as you go more than 25 mile an hour, if I'm at 26 or 27, there's a flashing light. So that light starts flashing just like the cop's light on those speed limit signs. So we have these radar enforced signs already which are reading the speed limit and displaying it in big red letters, but sometimes you don't look at it because it's not on your way. But as soon as that light starts 26, 27 miles an hour, you immediately notice it and you slow down. So that is very effective on that street. I've noticed that. Yeah. So that may be something you can look at. It's very effective there. Thank you.
Are those called cow signs? Is that what they're called?
Ann Loving, 342 South Irving Street. I'm really glad the valet is going to start this weekend. I hope it goes really well. I think that's one of the excellent ideas for finding extra parking. I'm also glad to hear Councilwoman Walsh mention tonight that the train station reconfiguration is still under consideration. I guess you have to have citizen safety look at it and the arborists look at it. That's another source of increased parking spaces. I sincerely hope you can get enough increased parking spaces that you don't have to do this garage. We don't need the garage. Thank you.
Thank you. So just, sorry. I didn't see you get up, sorry.
Cynthia Hallaby, 374 Evergreen Place. I know we've had long discussions about cutting back the train station plaza. I gather it's still on your books. So the last application, as you know, was sent to the DEP and it was rejected because it was full of untruths. So are you going to submit another application?
Is that your comment?
It's a question.
Thank you.
It's a question.
Right, it's public comment, and I'll respond.
But it's funny, sometimes you respond to other people's questions. You're not very systematic. Sometimes you respond to questions and sometimes you don't. So my question to you is, will you be submitting another application to the DEP?
Okay, and I'm going to respond to everything when we're done. So that's your comment. Okay, great. Okay, so I think that Heather, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The application to the DEP was not rejected. It was just asked for some additional information.
Additional information,
okay.
Correct.
So that
application
application presently,
but it needed additional information.
Presently, that application stands.
Correct.
Second, the comment that $600,000 was done on studies by a previous administration pertaining to any garage, that's inaccurate. $100,000 was spent on environmentals and surveys, and $500,000 was spent on designs and engineering designs. And the size and mass of those structures were absolutely rejected through what would have been a bond referendum vote, but that's where that money went. So the only other study would have been the Walker study, which is consistent with what we're doing now based on the difference in numbers of capacity and overall cost of whatever that number will be. In terms of members of the public coming to hear or to see garage designs, quite frankly, these are open public meetings, and other than the preliminary early on stage of a design, we have nothing else. I want to say that I believe that this is by far the most transparent village council ever, and you know, transparency is an interesting word because sometimes, you know, you can be transparent with everything you want someone to see. And I, just in response to the question about the cost, I will say that this council is going to be very prudent and diligent with taxpayer dollars and any decision that is made moving forward. And so with that...
Oh, could I just add one more point?
Sure, absolutely.
It also looks like we're going to have an RFP, and we're going to go out to several different builders, so no decision has been made. So Pike is not the end-all, be-all. We're going to bring in other people. It's going to be shown in public at either council meetings or special meetings so we can get through everything, and the public will be invited to attend every single one of those meetings.
That's a great point. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Seaton. And with that...
There was one
sure.
point raised about precast. It's always been
Thank
precast.
you.
The other one was precast.
The days of building a garage with the bricklayer and the mortar, gone. It's a lot faster, it's cheaper, and it's the way that garages are constructed. I mean, it's almost uniformly.
You know, and I just want to say thank you because that was in my notes. All structures to date have been absolutely 100% precast designs. There is no difference, not one to the next. They are all precast. Anyone who suggests they're being built brick by brick, not happening. That would really drive the cost up. In any event, so with that, we'll take a resolution to go into closed session.
Be it resolved by the Village Council of the Village of Ridgewood that the Village Council meet in closed session on October 25th, 2017 at 7:30 p.m. or as soon thereafter as the matter on the agenda can be reached, and that said closed session be held in the caucus room on the 4th floor of Ridgewood Village Hall, 131 North Maple Avenue, Ridgewood, New Jersey. Be it further resolved that the matters to be discussed in closed session are limited to legal matters to include Valley Hospital, affordable housing, contract negotiations to include town garage. Personnel will include boards and committees. These matters are allowable under NJSA 10:4-12 et sec. Be it further resolved that the minutes of this meeting shall be made available to the general public when such matters have been deemed completed by resolution of the Village Council. May I have a motion?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you.